listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
The R in Germany has rocketed to 2.88. Every German that's had the coronavirus is passing it on to 2.88 others. As the lockdown in Britain and the United States collapses in ignominy, is that the next new normal for us? And speaking about ignominy, what do you say about a presidential hopeful, the President of the United States, who advertises that 1 million people want to come to his rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma, but only 9,000 turn up, leaving 20,000 empty seats? You might well call him a man on his way to defeat, if he wasn't standing against Joe Biden, who couldn't fill a telephone box with his devotees. And in Reading, we're back to normal, obviously, because a Libyan terrorist is murdering our people in broad daylight, in a park, with a large knife. And guess where that Libyan terrorist used to live before he moved to Reading? Yes, that's right, in the city of Manchester. Now, what is it again about the British security services, Libyan exiles, and Manchester? You'll be hearing all about that from me. This is a radio show with pictures, so strap yourselves in. It's going to be rock and roll this evening, with guests from all over the world, listeners all over the world, and callers too. I'm George Galloway. This is the mother of all talk shows, the Open University of the Airwaves.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway.
This is Radio Sputnik.
And this is London, but broadcasting to you, of course, all over the world, thanks to the wonders of the internet and via SputnikNews.com. You can listen on crystal clarity on FM in the Washington, D.C. area, and a big audience is now building up for us in Washington, D.C. 105.5 are the magic numbers there. You can listen on AM from coast to coast, from burning city to burning city, right across the United States of America on AM radio. And you can listen online, of course, at SputnikNews.com. But most of you, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of you last week watched as well as listened to the show. And if you're doing that on Facebook, about which more later, then please share with all of your contacts, all of your friends, so that they all know that the mother of all talk shows is broadcasting live right now. You can do that on my own Facebook page, George Galloway Official, with a blue tick. You can do it on RT's multiple Facebook pages, and ditto on YouTube. On my own YouTube, and do subscribe while you're there, and on the YouTube channels of RT. You can even watch on Twitter, and even back again this week on Instagram. In Reading, yesterday, in broad daylight, in the warm sunshine, a Libyan terrorist knifed to death 3 people, one of them a history teacher, James Furlong, and we'll be talking about the history of Britain and Libya, ancient and modern, as the backdrop to the discussion on the terrorist attack which murdered 3 British citizens yesterday in full view of thousands of people, and stabbed and critically wounded several others. We'll be talking about the brave police sergeant who brought the knife man down with a rugby tackle for US listeners and watchers, rugby is the game that you Baudelarized into American football a century or more ago. A rugby tackle from a police sergeant brought the murderous rampage of this Libyan terrorist aged 25 to the ground. You still want to defund the police? Then you better call me, because I want to take issue with you. If it were not for that brave police sergeant, this murderer might well have gone on to commit mass murder. Now, he's been living in Reading. He is an asylum seeker. As I said in my introduction, he moved to Reading from Manchester. And of course, there is a tortuous, toxic relationship between the building next door to me, the MI5 headquarters, who are flying their white flag resplendently right now. I've just seen it. MI5 cosseted a cell of Islamist fanatic terrorists in Manchester, one of whom came back to haunt us, to murder and rip to pieces so many of our children at the Manchester Arena 3 years ago. And now this latest Libyan terrorist turns out to hail from, that's all I can tell you at this point, the very same milieu that the murderers of the Manchester Arena came from. They were cosseted there by the British security services on the immoral principle that my enemy's enemy is my friend. These Islamist throat-cutting fanatics were the enemies of the Libyan leader Gaddafi. And we, with a brief interregnum in which we tried to get into his tent and tried to make as much money from him as possible, were the enemy of Gaddafi. Ergo, any enemy of Gaddafi was a friend of ours. And we would give them passports. We would give them succor and comfort. We would give them air for their cell to breathe. Unfortunately, right in the heart of the great city of Manchester. But there's another set of issues emerge from the background of this individual captured by the rugby tackle of that brave police sergeant. And it's this. This man, although only 25, had 3 criminal convictions in Britain as an asylum seeker. He's not British. He doesn't even have asylum in Britain. He's an asylum seeker. He was convicted 3 times, sent to prison for violent offences, and yet was never deported from this country. This is an intelligence and a police and a justice department and a British government failure of cataclysmic proportions. It is obvious, and 90%, I'm sure, on this poll that I have just posted, will agree that anyone sent to prison whilst here as an asylum seeker should automatically be deported from prison on the hour of their release. But this man was not. He was given 3 strikes, but he was never out. And the only people out now are the people he knifed to death yesterday. Now, there's a third layer to this whole story, which is connected, of course, to the first. I never met Gaddafi or any member of his family. Unlike Tony Blair, who was best friends with Gaddafi's son, Tony Blair actually helped write his PhD thesis. I'm not making that up. The London School of Economics had a green room. I've been in it. A green room because they received millions of pounds from Gaddafi. I have nothing to do with the Gaddafi regime and wanted nothing to do with the Gaddafi regime. But I knew that David Cameron and Sarkozy and Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama were making a gigantic mistake in bombarding Libya as the air force of Al-Qaeda and what has now become ISIS in Libya. Libya has gone from the country with the highest standard of living in Africa to a non-state, not a failed state, but a non-state, with several governments, several parliaments, several armies, all still tearing each other apart over the corpse of what was once Libya. Now that would be deadly serious for us in any part of the world. The fact that it's on the Mediterranean, a short sail to the European mainland, made the mistake of Sarkozy, Cameron, and Barack Obama all the more grotesque, because the very people complaining about the flow out of Africa of refugees, asylum seekers, desperate poor people taking to the rubber rafts, many of them to sink under the waves in the Mediterranean, are the very people who blew the bloody doors off. That's right. They blew the doors to Africa off when they destroyed Libya. The Iraq invasion and occupation is now universally seen as a catastrophe, a catastrophic misjudgment. As some of us pointed out, it would be before they did it. The invasion of Afghanistan, which has now lasted longer than the First World War and the Second World War, and then again the Second World War, is widely regarded as having been all for nothing. All of that blood spilled for nothing. But the invasion, the occupation, the destruction of Libya was like watching a beautiful woman take an open razor across her own face. And no one at all has been held to account for it. Not the politicians who ordered it, not the media that cheerled it, not Sky News that hurtled up and down the highway with Al-Qaeda, cheering them to the rafters, calling them freedom fighters. None of these people have been held to account at all. Discuss. We will in the course of the next 3 hours or so. And did you hear the one about Donald Trump, who claimed that he was going to have to address his rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma, twice? He was going to have to address an overflow because 1 million people, he said, had said that they were coming to the rally in Tulsa. But actually only 9,000 tops turned up, leaving 20,000 minimum empty seats in the hall. And the overflow rally is consigned to history. One of those speeches that was never actually made. Does this spell the end of the hopes of the Trump legions in the United States? So many of them armed, many of them out in Tulsa this evening with their semi-automatic weapons, their bikers' jackets, and their goatees. What is it about goatees and these fellows? Does it spell the end for them? Well, it would do if the Democrats hadn't picked Joe Biden, who may very well be the only person in the whole of America that could not defeat Donald Trump in November for the presidency. Will Trump go if he's defeated? Will there be armed conflict in the United States? Who'd have thunk that I'd be sitting here talking in 2020 about whether a president will agree to leave office if he loses the election? Who'd have thunk in 2020 I'd be questioning whether the United States of America, the so-called leader of the so-called free world, might descend into armed chaos in the wake of a Trump defeat in November. And if Trump is defeated, how long can Biden possibly hold on to power in the White House when he can no longer tie his shoelaces, no longer tell his wife from his sister, no longer tell which basement of which house in which part of Delaware he's addressing a tiny number of people? There was at one point I saw he was broadcasting to 69 people this very week. If Trump's crowds are small, Joe Biden's could fit into a telephone box, which for younger viewers and listeners used to be a thing. And of course, the coronavirus has rocketed in Germany. There's a riot going on right now in Stuttgart, in Germany. Further particulars forthcoming when they are available. And the rocketing to 2.88 of the R rate surely means that the lockdown will have to be locked down again, and damn quick, because that level of reproduction of a killer virus is simply unlivable with in normal circumstances. Britain and the United States, lockdown, quarantine, social distancing, masks, have all collapsed in ignominy. And people have been massing, mobbing and rioting all over both countries in thousands, tens of thousands strong. That spike is yet to come. Yet Britain, from tomorrow, and moreover from the 4th of July, will be pretending that everything is back to normal. Now, there are still some people out there, not so many, or maybe I've just blocked them all, who claim that this was all a capitalist conspiracy, that the coronavirus was no worse than the flu, that this was all a ludicrous hype and exaggeration and part of some dark, nefarious New World Order, Illuminati plan. Some of those were in Ward 5 in Broadmoor, but others of them ought to have known better. And I once thought, when I knew them and cared for them, that they did know better. But we are now looking down the barrel of a second spike before the first spike has finished, of a coronavirus which may well be no worse than flu, no worse than the Spanish flu, which killed between 50 and 100 million people worldwide at the end of the First World War. It's all coming up this evening on the mother of all talk shows. Strap yourselves in. It's going to be a bumpy ride.
Radio Sputnik.
Tune in every Tuesday to Loud and Clear for a regular segment called False Profits, a weekly look at Wall Street and corporate capitalism, where we talk about the big economic issues of the week from the point of view of working people, the poor, and the U.S. position in the global economy. Join us this Tuesday and every Tuesday with financial policy analyst Daniel Sankey right here on Radio Sputnik.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com. We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold. Radio Sputnik, we speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
Here's my first poll then. Should foreign criminals be deported straight from jail? A, yes, 86%. B, no, 14%. I want big numbers on that poll. I want to send a message to the people who didn't deport the man that murdered those people in a Reading Park yesterday. Vote on my Twitter feed, at George Galloway. It's a 3-line whip. It's imperative. Now, my good colleague and friend Caleb Maupin, my favourite American broadcaster, is on the ground in New York City and there to tell us about the latest twists and turns of the Donald Trump affair and the John Bolton book, The Extended Kiss and Tell, National Enquirer within hardback, that came out this week and immediately shot to the top of the bestseller list. And of course, I'll be asking, as I always do, where is Joe Biden? Well, even Joe Biden doesn't know the answer to that question, but Caleb Maupin will. He is the legendary speaker, writer, broadcaster, and political analyst, and a man with a great bookshelf too. Caleb, welcome back to the mother of all talk shows. Let's start with the fiasco in Tulsa yesterday. Tell us what you thought of that.
Well, Donald Trump just didn't seem to have the energy we're used to getting from him. He spoke to an audience. There were a lot of empty chairs in the crowd. And that may have, affected Donald Trump on some level. We know that when you watch his speech, he spent about 10 minutes talking about how he had dismounted the stage at the West Point commencement ceremony. And he, went into detail about how the ramp from the stage was very slippery. He'd been wearing leather shoes. He went into great detail about this little incident at West Point. Now, throughout the speech, he continued to make reference to the protesters outside. And if you had been watching him, you would have thought that, like, the French Revolution was happening out there. Like, they were storming the Bastille and there was chaos. There was a small crowd of protesters out there. There was some shouting matches between Trump supporters and the protesters. But it wasn't very intense. We know at one point the police did disperse it with some pepper balls. It wasn't a big crowd, in the hundreds, maybe not even a full 100. Tulsa, Oklahoma, where Trump spoke, is not known as a left-wing stronghold by any means. But they blame the low audience turnout on the protesters. That's the position of the White House, is that the low audience turnout over the lack of people in the audience, that was caused by the protesters. However, the New York Times is saying it was a gang of internet pranksters on TikTok, and they're the ones responsible, that they had a lot of people reserve seats and not show up. So why exactly the crowd was small remains in question. There's dispute about it, but it wasn't Trump's strongest moment. I think he was hoping to start his campaign with a big, strong rally. Didn't have the energy we usually get.
It was a bit of a provocation holding it in Tulsa, wasn't it? Given what happened there in 1921?
Indeed, right. I mean, Tulsa, Oklahoma was the site of a horrendous massacre. They used to call it Black Wall Street. There were a lot of black-owned businesses there. It was kind of a business district for African-American businessmen, and the African-American community had kind of set up shop in Tulsa. And then there was a horrendous massacre, all kinds of people killed. They blamed Bolshevik agitators for the whole thing in the American media. But regardless, it was a racist massacre. And Trump had originally intended to not have his rally on Saturday, but on Friday, which is June 19th, Juneteenth, which is a holiday that is very important to the African-American community that commemorates the abolition of slavery. So he was forced by public outcry to have the rally one day later. But many saw it as a provocative move, something offensive in the face of all the widespread protests highlighting police brutality and racism in the United States. Quite a wild day. One of Trump's remarks from the rally has sparked quite a bit of controversy because apparently he said on the stage, if you watch it, you can hear it, he said that he had asked for them to slow down COVID-19 testing in the United States because the statistics were hurting the administration's image. Now, the White House has said that was a joke. That was simply an offhanded joke. Trump never tried to slow down COVID-19 testing. But many people have observed how slow testing was in the United States and said, if that was a joke, it's not funny. And why would he say such a thing to his supporters? So people are looking at Trump. And again, not the energy we're used to with the Donald. This wasn't Donald Trump at his full strength. Perhaps he looked out at the crowd and saw those empty seats. And
it's not been a great week then, Caleb, because the John Bolton kiss and tell, 500 pages of kiss and tell, that's a lot of kissing, a lot of telling, went to the New York Times bestseller #1 spot even before release. What can you tell us about the importance of that book?
Well, the courts have stepped in and said that John Bolton violated procedure, right? I mean, there was potentially information in that book that could have been a breach of national security, and that he didn't follow the proper procedure before publishing that book. And the courts may even be taking away some of the money he makes from the book, the $2 million advance and such. But regardless, it appears that the book is arguing that Donald Trump just isn't enough of a warmonger, that Donald Trump, just wasn't excited about military interventions around the world. And that's what John Bolton is all about. John Bolton was Mr. Invade Iraq. He's Mr. Confront Russia. He's Mr. Overthrow the government of Venezuela. He is a regime change enthusiast. So we now have Donald Trump tweeting out anger at John Bolton and saying that John Bolton loves dropping bombs. And Donald Trump seems to be countering John Bolton with some isolationist rhetoric, saying that John Bolton is just too enthusiastic about foreign entanglements. That seems to be the situation. But now we have the liberals, of course, supporting John Bolton and saying John Bolton's great. One thing people have noticed about the book, though, is it speaks very highly of Mike Pence. John Bolton seems to have blasted many people throughout the Trump administration, but he seems to have singled out Mike Pence, the vice president, for praise, which speculates. Many people speculate that if Trump were to step down and President Pence were to come in, that neocon faction that John Bolton represents might be satisfied.
I watched, I think it was a 4-parter on Netflix on Trump this past week. It is an incredible story. In one sense, it could only happen in America. This is a failed casino owner, a man who inherited millions from his real estate father and lost most of it, who's probably not remotely as rich as he has led us to believe, and yet he's still hanging in there. And he's still got a fighting chance, doesn't he, of being re-elected in November, if only because the Democrats have chosen Biden.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Biden has certainly raised more money than Donald Trump so far in the campaign, but he's put out these rather dull and boring advertisements that are not really stoking lots of enthusiasm. And it seems like the slogan of the Biden campaign is "He's not Trump," and they just seem to be jumping on the idea that Biden is not Trump, that Trump is no good, echoing mainstream media critiques of Donald Trump. But Donald Trump's rise really fits into the strange peculiarity of American politics, especially since the Second World War, because Tulsa, Oklahoma, where Trump spoke, 100 years ago, that was a socialist stronghold. Right? Oklahoma, the Okies were known for electing socialists and anarchists and wobblies and radicals to office. During World War I, there was a huge uprising called the Green Corn Rebellion of white farmers, Native Americans, African Americans who joined arm in arm saying they didn't want to fight in World War I. Oklahoma, the heartland of America, Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, these used to be strongholds for socialism and radical politics. But politics in the USA have gotten so confused and bizarre, it seems like leftism in the United States has become synonymous with anti-populism, whereas the right wing seems to have harnessed the banner of fighting for the people against the elites. So American politics has gotten so bizarre. Donald Trump is just kind of an incarnation of how weird things have gotten in the United States, where populism is a bad word in left-wing circles, and it's the far right wing that believe in unregulated capitalism and lowering the taxes on the rich and gutting the welfare state. They seem to be the ones that harness fighting for the working man.
Extraordinary. Now, the coronavirus number in Germany today, this evening, has been reported as having rocketed to an R number of 2.88. That's from 1.75, which was high enough keeping it under 1 is obviously vital to killing this coronavirus pandemic. If one person is infecting 2.88 others in Germany, where lockdown was eased, what's likely to happen in America and Britain, where lockdown long ago collapsed?
Well, I'm in New York City, and New York City seems to be the only part of the country where cases are not rapidly rising. We got hammered with it at the beginning, as you'll remember. We've been in lockdown for so long, but it seems like we have finally got it under control. But the rest of the country that's been opening up, that's where the rapid rise in cases is taking place. I'm excited because probably tomorrow I'll be able to finally go to the barber shop and get a haircut because I need it very badly. The restaurants might be opening up here very soon, but all over the country, many, many states are seeing a rapid increase in COVID-19. Now, many people are wondering, what will be the result of this rally? Because this rally that Donald Trump had, many people speculated that it was a public health risk. Donald Trump shot back and said no one was saying that about all the protests that are taking place. But regardless, if Trump's supporters end up getting COVID-19 from the rally, that could hurt him if it looks like he's endangering his supporters. But on the other hand, if the Trump supporters come out of the rally unscathed, if there's not infections as a result of that rally, that will further the idea that this is all a big conspiracy and a hoax from the Illuminati and the thing up on the thing. Those ideas are pretty widespread among Trump supporters, and that could actually help Donald Trump. And it could be seen as Donald Trump had a bold act by having a rally despite the public health warnings.
Caleb Maupin, thanks as always for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Isn't he articulate, young Caleb? He's my colleague at RT America. Should foreign criminals be deported straight from jail? A, yes, 87%, up 1. B, no, 13%, down 1. You can vote on my Twitter feed at George Galloway. Let's take a couple of calls. Michael is in Minneapolis, the epicenter, George Floydville. Michael, welcome.
Thanks, George. Happy Father's Day to you.
And you, thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, it's been an interesting week in Minneapolis. We had a very tragic, one of the biggest mass shootings in recent years last night in the very busy uptown neighborhood, which is where a lot of people go out to have a good time on the weekends. There were 11 people shot and 1 person killed. Wow. They're still uncovering details of how that happened, but that was a big tragedy. But I actually wanted to call and talk about a couple of shootings that happened earlier in the week and the continued unrest. And it's sort of an interesting development. So there have been multiple shootings this week where crowds have gathered after the shots. And when the police showed up and tried to start working, the crowd didn't allow them to come in. And there were bystanders administering CPR and, providing medical help, but basically telling the police, get out of here. We don't want you here. We're going to take care of this and make sure that you don't, ruin this. And I think that really speaks to the level of, just the total lack of legitimacy the American public feels toward the police right now, that even when there's something as serious as a shooting, in Minneapolis, people are not interested in having the police have anything to do with it. They want to take care of it and try to help people. And that's it's nice. It's like a community feeling, but it's also, sort of a loss of legitimacy of the law. And I was wondering kind of your thoughts on that.
Well, I'm not one of these who wants to abolish the police or defund the police, so I guess I wouldn't do well in elections in Minneapolis, where some kind of no-go area, a free zone, has been apparently established. Tell us about that, Michael.
Yeah, so I think it's sort of along the lines of the autonomous zone in Seattle, and just the idea that there's an area where people can protest and sort of police themselves. And that's been a frequent theme in protests in recent weeks. In fact, some of the protests I've attended, they'll even, they'll have people that they've set up in advance, sometimes even armed people, who they'll point out to us. They're all wearing the same Black Lives Matter shirt, and they make it clear. They say, "Hey, look, if anybody gets out of line, we're going to kick you out of here. We're not going to stand for that. We're not going to allow." So I think it's a development of the protest movement. Looking at the looters and some of the actors who have taken advantage of this to, burn businesses to the ground, often of totally innocent business owners, and sort of fight back against that and sort of police themselves. And I think that kind of goes along the lines of what I'm saying. There's been this move to try to handle things on our own terms without getting the police involved. And George, I understand your position. I think that, when people talk about defunding the police in the United States, what they're talking about is, when someone's having a mental health breakdown, we should be calling a social worker, not the police, when things like that happen. So I think, or if someone's in distress, but it's not, there's no direct physical endangerment to anyone other than someone is a danger to themselves, they kind of want to move in that direction. And so I understand your position, but your police officers can also be trusted to not just shoot people on a whim or to brutalize people on a whim at the same level.
Well, they couldn't, maybe thank God they don't have weapons. Our police are not armed and so couldn't. And we have good police and bad police, as I'm sure you do in the United States, though maybe our ratio is a little bit better than yours. How will all this impact on the elections in Minnesota come November? There's some quite famous Democratic politicians in your area. Are they going to see their popularity boosted or damaged, do you think?
I mean, I think you've already seen a lot of their popularity damaged, but I will say of the largest people in the state, the governor was just elected in 2018. Tina Smith was just elected as the Senate in 2018. Amy Klobuchar was just reelected in 2018. So none of these people are up for reelection until 2022 or 2024. I think what you're going to see next year in the mayoral election, I think you're going to see Jacob Fry get absolutely crushed, and rightfully so, because his entire tenure has just been a joke. I mean, not just starting with this. I mean, he's been, there's a huge housing shortage in Minneapolis. He hasn't done anything to help people, a rising homeless population, all that kind of stuff. But I will say the issues we have in the police here, I think, go back to your point talking about Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya, because what happened is, they got all this Homeland Security funding, all these police forces. Not only did they take all this excess military gear that they now use domestically as if, as you've said, we're occupied in our own country, but a lot of the people training the police now in the United States are military people. So you've got these military, ex-military vets going around from city to city across the United States and training police officers to look at us as the enemy. And I know people who have been through this police training, and they will show them, hours of videos of cops being killed by being attacked, or like in the worst view possible. They go out of their way to make them scared of everyone and make them think that every interaction could be their last. So it's the way the training is the biggest issue. As always with all things, the issue is systemic. But I really think that the issue we're seeing with the police and the escalation of it and the killings that have increased over and over in recent years, you can tie a lot of that back to our occupation in the Middle East and the fact that we've fully militarized the police in the United States.
Thank you very much, as always, Michael in Minneapolis. Here are the phone numbers if you want to join in and comment on that or anything I've said up to now. It's in the UK, 02077 982 255. And if you're calling from the US, it's 001 757 744 4480. And Shamil is on the line in Inverness in Bonnie, Scotland. Go ahead, Shamil.
Good evening, Mr. Galloway. I hope you're well.
By the grace of God, I'm good. Thank you.
I'm glad to hear it. I must begin with a caveat. I hope you'll forgive me. As a great man once said, I tell you this so you know where I'm coming from.
Okay.
After service in the Isles Malvinas, I developed PTSD. It's caused me very many memory problems. So if I sound somewhat stilted, it's because I'm working from notes. I hope you make allowance.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so peace be upon you and your loved ones, Mr. Galloway.
Thank you.
We have spoken before, actually. The day after Colin's birthday on JV, which was later banned in our free speech Western world. Anyway, love the show. Never miss it. Thank you for taking my call.
Thank you, brother.
And what I want to speak about specifically is the defacement and destruction of edifices, statues and this kind of thing. And while I have no reservations at all in supporting the call for change in our world, it's blatantly unfair, horribly unequal, and something does need to change. From my own perspective, though, I can't help feeling that destroying a statue is self-defeating. Would it not make more sense to leave the statue in place and fix a plaque onto the pedestal, telling the true history, including the crimes, of the individual represented? At least future generations could learn something from that, but an empty space leaves nothing to learn from. Surely anyone watching has got the discernment to know we can't hide from history. The fact that so many do watch and listen, I think that proves the point. I don't think I'm alone. But there was another great man once said that if we do not learn from history, we're doomed to repeat it.
Indeed, and again and again. Well, look, Shamil, thanks for that. I laid out my views in several places on these statues. I do think that statues are put up for political reasons, and they come down for political reasons. They come down either by a governmental fiat, local governmental fiat, or popular fiat. Some of the statues that are being torn down or defaced are clearly foolish. The General Grant, for example, was pulled down yesterday. General Ulysses S. Grant was, of course, the man who destroyed the army of Robert E. Lee. He's the man who defeated the Confederacy. He did, at one stage in his life, own slaves, but he freed them. And some years before the liberation and the Civil War itself. So of all the statues to pull down in the United States, the man that defeated the Confederacy was probably quite low down, or ought to have been quite low down the list. What I think in an overarching way is that all of this is a diversion. Because when the statues come down, if they all come down, nothing fundamentally will have changed, except this, that the division amongst the working class between black and white, between so-called left and so-called right, will be very much more dangerously wide. And therefore, the people whose system was built on slavery, built on colonialism, will be actually more secure because of that division at the end of this process than they were at the beginning of it. Shamil, thank you for that call from the Scottish Highlands, Inverness. Now, earlier this week, I did a short on the International Criminal Court and Donald Trump's threats to it for RT. Take a look. Did you hear the one about the sheriff that threatened to burn down the courthouse? That'll be the United States of America. The USA declared itself the policeman of the world many decades ago, but it doesn't have much care for law and certainly not for justice. Just in the last days, the US has threatened a savage regime of sanctions against the International Criminal Court. Now, they were in on the beginning of the ICC, and I was myself against it. I knew exactly how it would turn out. The United States has participated in many cases at the ICC, gathering evidence, helping to deliver suspects before the court. But it refused to join the ICC, which is, of course, its sovereign right. Russia and China haven't joined it either, because they too knew that it would be one-sided justice. The only people the ICC sends to prison in The Hague are black African leaders who've somehow fallen out of favour with the empire. But it's one thing refusing to participate in the ICC. It's another thing even refusing to extradite suspects who are your nationals to face justice at the ICC. Both of those things are part of the United States' national sovereignty. But the US has gone much further. It is denying the right of the ICC even to consider cases tabled by members of the ICC, in this case Afghanistan, when it comes to allegations of war crimes and crimes against humanity that are alleged to have been carried out by United States military personnel. In other words, the US is giving itself the right to refuse to join a court, but to dictate to that court what cases it might consider if they are brought by members of the court. In this case, the United States is refusing to join the court, yet dictating to the court which cases it might be permitted to consider. Now, John Bolton's words are a lot in the news today. His highly remunerative kiss and tell against Donald Trump is topping the bestseller list already, and it isn't even out yet. But did you know that John Bolton's fingerprints are over a measure passed by the United States Congress to enable the US military to invade the Netherlands? Yes, that's right. Plucky little Amsterdam might be treated to an airborne invasion. They might see the US Marines wading up their canals if they have the temerity to get a hold of any American official or serving or ex-serving military personnel. The Invasion of the Netherlands Act. Just think about that. And its author was John Bolton. And Donald Trump was stupid enough to employ John Bolton in the first place, even though he knew that Bolton's only interest was war. So my point of view is this. I hold no candle for the International Criminal Court, but I wouldn't dream of seeking to deny the ICC the right to consider any case brought before it by a member state. If the US wants to burn all its bridges, then go ahead. If it wants to lose the friendship of those countries that were once its closest allies, then go ahead. The attack on the ICC is definitely the best way so far to do that. European governments are now beginning to hit back. The German government is very angry with Donald Trump and his administration, not just over the threats to the ICC, but over the threats to German business and the German government and any idea of German sovereignty when the Nord Stream 2 pipeline project is openly threatened with destruction by the United States government, all in the interests of their freedom gas, their own liquid petroleum gas. That's apparently what we should be buying rather than that pesky, fur-hatted Russian gas. But the other European countries are just as angry. It may be that this is a bridge too far, and it may be that the European governments will align with European public opinion and tell the sheriff to get back on his horse and ride out of town.
Have something to say? Do you disagree with George? Then call us now and give us your view.
You're watching the mother of all talk shows. I'm asking, should foreign criminals be automatically deported straight from their jail sentence? Yes, 87%. No, 13%. Please vote now on my Twitter feed at George Galloway. Let's take another call. By the way, it's Everton 0, Liverpool 0. We'll keep you posted. Absolutely no reason to switch over. Probably be a dull and uneventful match in any case. Let's take the first call. Amil in Israel. Go ahead, Amil.
Good evening, Mr. George Galloway. This is my first time I get involved in your program. I highly admire your honesty. I've been watching your program over the last 2 months. Okay, I just would like to talk about United States involvement.
Chris, I actually can't hear or follow this call. Can you maybe get them on a better line, please? And then we'll see if we can get Amil back again. Now, on social media, Twitter user says, I think a foreign national should be transferred back to a prison in the country of origin shortly after the start of their sentence, after victims' consultation. And then it's up to their home country to determine the sentence. Only exception for me is a terrorism-related sentence. Attila says it should be automatic, and where possible, they should be made to serve their sentence in their country of origin, at that country of origin's expense. And Amit says yes for serious crimes, murder, kidnapping, sexual assault, paedophilia, etc. No for petty crimes, non-violent crimes, pickpocketing, shoplifting, etc. Well, that's terribly liberal of you, Amit. But in this case, this man was imprisoned for violent offences. And so he should have been deported. But he was not deported. And three people are now dead at his hands. And the fate of those in a critical condition is not yet out of the balance. Dan says, happy Father's Day, Mr. Galloway. Thank you so much. My 3 sons brought me breakfast in bed this very morning. Andre says, I'd appreciate if you'd spend a few minutes of your show to address the irresponsible way Sweden, my country, has handled the COVID-19 pandemic. As you perfectly know, Sweden chose a very bold approach to the pandemic, choosing not to lock down, making recommendations as opposed to restrictions, and relying on the non-existent common sense of our citizens. We will talk about that, Andres, with Dr. Ranjeet Brar in the 3rd hour. Have we got Amil back? Let's try Amil again in Israel. Amil, my apologies, I really couldn't hear you. Try again.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Galloway. This is my first time. I get involved in your program. It's my honor to talk to you. I highly admire your honesty. I have been listening to your program. Okay, just my opinion about the U.S. involvement in the international law. It's quite unfair. For the reason that the United States does not want to take a fair part because she has been involved in many crimes.
Yes, for sure. The way I look at it, Amil, as I said in that short, they're entitled not to join the ICC. Israel hasn't joined it. Russia, China haven't joined it. But they're not entitled to, having not joined it, instruct the ICC on what cases they may consider.
Yes, the reason that they want to impose a sanction in ICC because they being afraid of getting a fair trial, since they have been involved in many crimes. And they are afraid to face justice. That's why they threaten to...
Yeah, for sure. And you can understand their concern about fair trials because trials are particularly fair in the United States of America. It is an unimpeachable example of what justice should be. Amil, thanks. Much better that second time around. And I heard you very clearly. Thanks very much for listening and phoning in. Let's go to Julian in Lewis. Go ahead, Julian.
Hi, George. Can you hear me?
I can very clearly.
Excellent. A question and an observation.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with the observation first. Mm-hmm. I visited a mosque virtually this weekend. It was a great experience. I went to the Shia Isna Ashari community of Middlesex, hosted by Mafil Ali. It was a great experience. It was good to talk to people who are not of my faith, but it was a really good thing. That's my observation. They need probably some support building their community centre, which will be multi-faith. Great stuff. My question is, down here in Lewis, in the southeast of England, we've been receiving copies of the Epoch Times through our letterboxes, and I just would like you to explain
What's that? What is the Epoch Times?
Well, as far as I can tell, it is a propaganda rag produced by the Falun Gong that is entirely anti-Chinese.
Oh, dear. And why do you think they picked Lewis for that? Maybe they want you to make China the next effigy on bonfire night.
Exactly. No, that might well be the case, but, you know, myself and my neighbours have received that, and it is just a rag full of anti-Chinese propaganda. And I'm curious as to, has anybody else received it?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I've never heard of it. I must say I thought the Falun Gong had fallen out of use. But, of course, every part of the anti-China orchestra can be brought back in to the movement at any point. During Ramadan, it will be the Xinjiang issue, the Uyghur issue. When the Dalai Lama is back in vogue, it'll be the Tibet issue, the Taiwan issue, the Hong Kong issue, the coronavirus issue, the South China Sea issue. There are many parts to this orchestra, and sometimes more than one part is playing at the same time. But I must say I'd forgotten about the Falun Gong. Let me investigate it, Julian. I don't know enough about it to comment in detail, but before you go, what kind of quality, I mean printing quality, design quality and so on was it? Was it crude and likely to go straight in the bin, or was it attention grabbing?
Not at all crude, high quality, but very short in a number of pages. And just every single article was anti-Chinese. It was just appalling. You know, I have people who read The Guardian, neighbours who read The Guardian who received it, and even they were appalled.
Well, of course, there are always useful idiots who can be conscripted by the empire to confront the latest villain of the piece. I've lived so long, I remember so many of them. Nasser in Egypt was the ogre. Arafat was the ogre. Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein, Hafiz al-Assad, Russia, Putin, China. And there will always be a section of our population that when they hear the roll of the drums, they'll step forward and salute. And I dare say there will be some in Lewis. And watch out for my suggestion that this may have been done in your town because of your famous bonfire night and effigy. Let's see if anyone now suggests a Chinese caricature to be burned in Lewis. If I'm any judge, that's why they'll have done it. Julian, fascinating. Thank you very much indeed. Now, look, if you're enjoying the show, please share the stream now. Hit the share button so others can join the College of Knowledge tonight. Okay, if you're watching this stream, press share. Now, the votes, should foreign criminals be deported straight from jail, still 87% yes and 13% no. But I want that vote up. You've still got an hour to vote on this one. I'm determined that it should get to 90%, which is what I predicted before it began. I don't know if that's the latest score, but if it is, it's still Everton 0, Liverpool 0. Let's get the news with the wonderful Jamie Lowe.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Tune in every Tuesday to Loud and Clear for a regular segment called False Prophets, a weekly look at Wall Street and corporate capitalism, where we talk about the big economic issues of the week from the point of view of working people, the poor, and the U.S. position in the global economy. Join us this Tuesday and every Tuesday with financial policy analyst Daniel Sankey right here on Radio Sputnik.
It's time to double down with Max and Stacy.
Yeah, double down. We're talking markets, finance, business, economics, ka-ching, bling, just about everything money related on Sputnik. It's called Double Down.
We're asking, are dead cats bouncing or have fundamentals changed? That's this week on Double Down.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
The man held on suspicion of killing 3 people in a terrorist attack at a park in Reading on Saturday night has been named as Kari Sadala. It's understood that he is a 25-year-old Libyan asylum seeker who was living in the town. He is also believed to have served a short UK prison sentence. Sadala was arrested at the scene, and police say they are not looking for anyone else over what has been designated a terrorist incident. Eyewitnesses have described seeing a man with a large knife randomly attacking groups of people gathered in the park. Prime Minister Boris Johnson said he was appalled and sickened by the attack in Thornbury Gardens around 7 p.m. last night. Metropolitan Police Assistant Commissioner Neil Basu, head of counter-terrorism policing, described it as an atrocity. He added that investigators are not looking for anyone else in connection with the attack. 2 men have died in a shooting after a lockdown party which involved hundreds of people. Police were called after reports that a gunshot had been heard in Caythorpe Street and Moss Side, Manchester at about 1 a.m. this morning. The 2 victims, aged in their 20s and 30s, self-presented in hospital and died a short time later. Greater Manchester Police said the shooting had happened at an unplanned event near to the location of an earlier community event. No arrests have yet been made. The UK government is expected to reduce the 2-metre social distancing rule to 1 metre in England this week. Health Secretary Matt Hancock said the distance could be lowered with mitigations to cut the risk of transmission. He confirmed new easing of lockdown measures would be announced in the coming days, including whether pubs and restaurants in England can reopen on the 4th of July. Teenage social media and TikTok users are understood to be behind the smaller than expected numbers at US President Donald Trump's campaign rally in Tulsa yesterday. The Trump campaign had boasted of 1 million requests for free tickets. But in the event, the 19,000-seat arena was only half full. Teenage opponents had apparently ordered thousands of free tickets without intending to turn up. Trump's campaign manager had blamed radical protesters and the media. Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, a leading Democrat politician, praised the young people she said had flooded the Trump campaign with fake ticket reservations. There had been health concerns about holding the rally, the first of its kind since lockdown measures began in many US states. Those attending the rally had to sign a waiver protecting the Trump campaign from responsibility for any illness. Hours before the event began, officials said 6 staff members involved in organising the rally had tested positive for COVID-19. In his speech, Trump said, "When you do testing to that extent, you're going to find more people. You will find more cases." The world champion Formula One racing driver Lewis Hamilton has announced plans to set up a commission in his name to increase diversity in motorsport. He said he wants the Hamilton Commission to make a real tangible and measurable change. He said, "Despite my success in the sport, the institutional barriers that have kept F1 highly exclusive persist. It's not enough to point to me or to a single new black hire as a meaningful example of progress." Hamilton said his commission would explore how motorsport can be used to engage more young people from black backgrounds with science, technology, engineering and maths subjects. And finally, the Irish Taoiseach Leo Varadkar has answered a bet challenged and proved he is something of a pop culture expert by quoting from the Mean Girls movie in his coronavirus news conference. Varadkar slipped in a reference to the 2014 classic as he announced a further rolling back of COVID-19 restrictions on Friday. He said, "Some have asked whether there is a limit to what we can achieve," before drawing upon a line from the hit movie. "My answer is that the limit does not exist." The quote was taken from the scene in which protagonist Katie Heron, played by Lindsay Lohan, answers a question about limits to win a maths competition for her school. The Lord of the Rings and the Goonies star Sean Astin, who played Samwise Gamgee in the Middle-earth trilogy, bet the Irish leader 50 quid to quote Mean Girls in his next speech. And I expect that cheque is now in the post. But that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
You're watching the mother of all talk shows, and it's the mother of all polls going on. Should foreign criminals be deported after their jail sentences? A, yes, 86%. Down 1. B, no, 14%. Up 1. I'd really love somebody who's in that 14% to call the show and explain why. 02077 982 255. That's the number if you're in Britain. 001 757 744 4480 if you are in the United States. Still 0-0, Everton and Liverpool. Now, hands up if you know anything at all about what happened to the U.S. Liberty, the United States naval vessel Liberty, which was attacked by its ally, Israel, in 1967 with much loss of life and significant loss of blood. This would seem to be a story of some importance. Was it a mistake in the fog of war? Was it a deliberate provocation? Why was it covered up? Why has no justice been achieved for the United States Navy sailors on board the Liberty? Why is this a matter that is never even discussed? Well, we are lucky enough to have with us, I hope in good sound and vision, Ernie Gallo, who is an ex-president of the USS Liberty Veterans Association and who was on the Liberty at the time. Ernie, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here.
Can you explain to what I think will be an overwhelmingly unknowing audience, certainly on this side of the Atlantic, maybe yours also, what happened on that day?
After being surveilled all morning by the Israeli aircraft, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, they returned and immediately attacked the ship with jets and then finally torpedo boats. And a helicopter came out with armed troops following that, but they eventually turned around and left. The Israelis were definitely trying to sink the ship because they used a torpedo and take out anybody who was still left alive.
Admittedly, in 1967, Israel was not the super ally of the United States, which it subsequently became. In 1956, for example, in the Suez Crisis, the United States had strongly condemned the Anglo-French-Israeli conspiracy against Egypt, and that was only therefore a decade or so before. Since then, of course, Israel has become super glued to the United States. But even in 1967, this must have come as something of a shock to you.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, you're right. Both the Eisenhower and Kennedy administrations had an arms embargo and a balanced Middle East policy, and LBJ turned that all around to put us on the track that we are on now today.
So, I mean, it must have been a case of not being able to believe your eyes when they opened fire on you.
Oh, absolutely. I had no idea that the Israelis were the ones who were attacking us until later on, after the attack was over. The planes that initially shot up the ship were not marked. It was only until the torpedo boat showed up that the folks that were topside were able to see the Israeli flags. But yeah, it was a real shock. I couldn't believe it either. Yes.
And how many people died on your ship, and how many were wounded?
34 were killed and 174 wounded. 2/3 of the crew was incapacitated.
I mean, that is a very high casualty number.
Well, we were target practice. We had no way of. We had 450 caliber machine guns for repel boarders. No way could we protect ourselves or shoot back and do any meaningful damage to the aircraft and torpedo boats. And I might mention, you know, the North Koreans, when they attacked the Pueblo, at least they communicated with them first to try to get them to surrender, which they did. The Israelis did not make any attempt to communicate with us. They just simply attacked from the get-go.
Is there any possibility that this was mistaken identity, that your ship was mistakenly taken as an enemy ship?
That morning, when we arrived on site, we counted 12 overflights of Israeli reconnaissance aircraft. They took pictures of us. They knew who we were. We were flying the American ensign, and our ship looked like the very different kind of military ship. First of all, we were not a man of war, and we had something like 40-some antennas from stem to stern. Very modern-looking vehicle. What I'm trying to say is, they later said that they thought we were the Egyptian ship El Khazar, and that's foolish. The Liberty was twice the size, and we were well marked. Across the stern, with very large letters, USS Liberty, and our flag was flying 99% of the time. During the attack, a smaller flag was shot down, and our captain ordered our holiday colors to be put up, which is a very large flag. So there was no mistake. They knew who we were. As a matter of fact, as we were trying to send a Mayday to the Sixth Fleet, our circuits were jammed. Now, those 6 frequencies, that's very important because they knew the frequencies we were going to use to communicate with the Sixth Fleet, and they were jamming them. But we did manage to finally get through.
Why on earth would they have done this? What's your theory on it, Ernie? You've been fighting for a long time on this now. What's your current theory?
Well, there's 2 authors who have written books. Phil Nelson wrote Remember the Liberty, and Joan Mellon wrote Blood in the Water. Independently, they came to the same conclusion. From their research, LBJ colluded with the Israelis to sink the ship in order to bring the United States into the war. Remember, this was during the Cold War, and the Soviets were about to get into it. because Syria and Egypt were the client states. So they were losing very badly. And they let us know that they were about to send paratroopers in at any moment if Israel made any attempt to go towards Damascus or Cairo. So, yeah.
So a provocation, I mean, this is much worse, bloodier than the Tonkin incident, which took the Vietnam War, American war on Vietnam to a new level, because this one involved the deliberate slaughter of American military personnel.
Absolutely. One of the things that happened when we got our May Day off to the 6th Fleet, the USS Saratoga immediately launched planes to come to our aid and advised the USS America to launch planes also, which they did. And Admiral Geis, who's in charge of the air ops, contacted Washington and told them what was happening. Now, at that time, we didn't know who was attacking us, so it could have been the Soviets. The Secretary of Defense, McNamara, got on the line and told them to return the planes to the decks of the ships. Admiral Geis couldn't believe what he was hearing. He followed those orders, but the more he thought about it, and it's a violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, he decided to launch planes again, made sure that the planes were conventionally armed, and they did. And he sent word back to Washington again, telling them what he was doing. And McNamara got on the line again and said, return those planes to the ships. And Geis challenged the order because it was a bad order. But this time Johnson got on the line and said, return those planes to the deck. He says, I don't care if these sailors die. I will not have my ally embarrassed. Now, as I said, we didn't know who was attacking us, but they did. I think that's very damning evidence.
Now, the cover-up, how big a cover-up has it been? I mean, I'm guessing the vast majority of my audience this evening has never heard this story before. How big has this cover-up been?
Yeah, we were told that we could never talk about the incident to our wives, to our mothers and fathers. We couldn't talk to anyone about what happened. The threat of being arrested, fined, jailed, or worse. They sent officers out to the Mediterranean, to all the communication centers, to make sure that anybody that had heard anything or anything that was written was confiscated, and they made sure that it was destroyed. The most important thing, though, is that the Navy Court of Inquiry that followed was a sham. It was orchestrated from the White House. That the testimony under oath given by the USS Liberty crew was changed or dropped, or anything that made Israel look like the aggressor. In other words, the White House had told the Admiral Kidd, who was the president of the Navy report, that the Israelis, that the attack was going to be accidental. And one of our officers saw Israelis machine gunning our life rafts, the only life rafts that were left, machining them in the water. That's against the Geneva Convention, and it's a war crime. And the Navy Court of Inquiry then becomes the official document. Later on, we filed a war crimes report with the Pentagon, and thinking that this is our chance to have an investigation. The Pentagon came back and said, we don't need to investigate. The Navy Court of Inquiry did that. End of story. So yes, the cover-up and even continued in 2000 and 2004, where the State Department had a conference, so-called conference, where they were going to discuss the Six-Day War. Only the real mission of that conference was to talk about the attack on the USS Liberty. From the folks that were invited, it was evident that they were trying to polish this thing off to make sure that history would indicate that the attack was accidental. But unfortunately, the month before, the legal counsel for the Navy Court of Inquiry report, Captain Ward Boston, had came out of the closet and gave us a sworn affidavit that Admiral Kidd and him both know that the attack was deliberate and saw the evidence. So yeah, the cover-up has been extensive.
Now, were the families of the fallen ever compensated? Is there still any effort being made for justice in this case?
No, I don't know of any of my shipmates that have ever received any compensation from Israel. I received a check for a little over $200 at the time, but it hardly covered replacing my uniforms and things that I lost on the attack.
And is there an ongoing, what are you demanding now, Ernie, as an association?
Well, we want the truth told to the American public. Now, to do that possibly would be a congressional investigation. Now, in our Constitution, there is a clause that the House has to investigate any naval ship that's attacked in peacetime, and this goes back to the piracy days. Anyway, they've done so, except for one, the USS Liberty. Now, our distractors are going to tell you that, oh, there's been 11 or 12 investigations. Well, those investigations would appear on a congressional list, and that there is none. And besides which, how could you have an investigation about the attack if the crew is not subpoenaed to give testimony under oath? That's never happened.
Fascinating story. Ernie Gallo, thank you very much indeed. The ex-president of the USS Liberty Veterans Association, and the calls are coming in already on that subject. Let's go to the first of them, Jim in Fort Collins. Go ahead, Jim.
Hi, George.
Hi there, go ahead.
Mr. Gallo. Yes. About 20 years ago, I read a book by Captain, I guess his name was Jim Ennis. He was the captain of the U.S. Liberty.
Yeah.
I understand. Were your communications jammed as the attack
Ernie's gone, Jim, so you're just talking with me, yeah.
Oh, I understand. I read in the book that...
He said that. He said the communications. He said their communications were deliberately jammed, and the frequencies were known to the people, to the attackers.
Right. That's the only way it could happen. An ally somebody would have to give the codes away or something like that.
Exactly, yeah.
Also, George, what happened when they were rescued the next day? The captain gave a list of the men who were killed and wounded in action. Okay, and within minutes he got a reply, a terse reply that says, "What are you talking about? Action? It was an accident." Now, given that it was probably 2 o'clock in the morning in Washington, and it was probably some junior officer who was taking these calls, he was told already to say it was an accident.
Yeah,
it was really weird.
It is weird, and the scale of the death toll and the wounded is absolutely phenomenal. Some accident, Jim.
Yeah, and when they put the 2 torpedoes into him.
Yeah.
Okay. Right after that, they flew.
And
do
they
you need
flew
any help?
Yeah, they turned back with the airborne, but they attacked with troops, torpedoes, and aircraft.
Yeah, And then they asked if you need help after the 2 torpedoes went into the starboard side.
And after machine gunning the life rafts.
Yeah, that's what when I was got on with the screener, I said, hey, I read the book, and they attacked the life rafts, and that's a war crime.
Yeah.
And he finally got to it before I got on. Yeah.
Jim, thanks for the call. And let me stay in the United States on that subject. In Idaho Falls, we've got Eve. Eve, welcome.
Hello, George. Thank you for this wonderful interview.
Thank you.
Each time, I hear about this story, it makes me cry. Really, I mean, it's really terrible. No, the reason why I was calling you is to the people who have never heard about it. Unlike Kennedy assassination or September 11, where you have a million story out there, for the USS Liberty, you have only 2. You have the story of the whole crew of the ship. And those people were not idiots. They were specialists of communications. And you have the story of the Johnson administration, McNamara, and maybe also McCain, the father. People on that side, and you have the story. You have only 2 stories. Which one do you believe?
Yeah.
That's the first question. When I talk to people, I say, which one do you believe? After the track record of the U.S. administration, which one do you believe? And then you go from there.
Exactly so. Thank you, Eve, for that. Which one do you believe? Let us know on the phone or on the Twitter at George Galloway at RTUK News. Let's take a 1-minute break.
Radio Sputnik.
Tune in every Wednesday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker and John Kiriakou for a regular segment called Beyond Nuclear, where Brian and John discuss nuclear issues, including weapons, energy, waste, and the future of nuclear technology in the United States, with Kevin Camps, the radioactive waste watchdog at the organization Beyond Nuclear. Listen on Wednesdays right here on Radio Sputnik.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
Still 0-0 in the Everton-Liverpool game, and my poll is still going. Should foreign criminals be deported straight from jail at the end of their sentence? A for yes, B for no. Let's have a resounding victory on that one, please. Now, this is the spot in the show where I look back at the 7 days in our history, at the events and incidents that shaped our world and our present, and probably also our future, as these things tend to do. It was on this day in 1945 that US troops finally took the Japanese island of Okinawa after almost 3 months of some of the bloodiest fighting of the Second World War. The island was defended by around 100,000 Japanese troops, more than 90,000 of whom were killed. The Allies also suffered unprecedented losses, with 36 warships and landing craft sunk, 763 aircraft lost, 763, and more than 12,500 servicemen killed. The Japanese commander-in-chief on Okinawa, Mitsuru, committed suicide the next day. It was also on this day in 1982 that Britain's Princess Diana gave birth to a future king. William is second in the line behind his father, Charles. On June the 22nd, in 1941, Hitler made one of the most catastrophic and costly blunders in history by launching Operation Barbarossa and invading the then Soviet Union. That gigantic and bloody mistake was to eventually turn the Second World War and keep the whole world free from fascism. Let's never forget that more than 26 million Soviet citizens and soldiers gave their lives for our freedom. On the same day, in 1979, the former Liberal Party leader, Jeremy Thorpe, walked free after a jury cleared him of attempting to murder his lover, Norman Scott. And in 1981, on this day, Mark Chapman pleaded guilty to shooting dead former Beatle John Lennon in New York. He is still being held in Attica prison and is unlikely ever to be freed. Going back a few centuries, the genius who was Galileo was shown torture implements by the Inquisition and forced to recant his proven view that the Earth orbited the Sun rather than the other way around. It wasn't until 1992 that the then Pope admitted that Galileo had got it right and the Church had got it wrong for more than 300 years. On June the 23rd, also in 1992, the New York crime boss, the Teflon Don, John Gotti, was sentenced to life imprisonment with no chance of parole. The head of the city's largest mafia family, that is if you exclude the families running Wall Street, was convicted of racketeering and 5 counts of murder, including that of the former head of the Gambino clan, Paul Castellano. Gotti died in prison in 2002. Again, on the same day, in 1974, the first extraterrestrial message was sent from Earth into space. We're still waiting for a reply. Frankly, I've no reason to believe that they will ever want to know us. And in 2016, the United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union in the Brexit referendum. I'll be speaking about that very subject on Tuesday night at 8 p.m. on all platforms. Brexit and the battle for Britain with yours truly. Tune in, won't you? A day later, on June the 24th, 1983, America's first woman in space, Sally Ride, returned safely to Earth in the Challenger space shuttle after a successful 6-day flight. Was that really her name? Is somebody pulling my leg here? Sally Ride? Ride, Sally, Ride. Wasn't that in the commitments? Wasn't that a song? In 1813, Napoleon Bonaparte launched his ill-fated invasion of Russia. Hitler didn't learn the lesson. What's wrong with these people? Picking fights with Russia. No good can come of it. In 1876, on June the 25th, in the Battle of the Little Bighorn, George Armstrong Custer's 7th Cavalry were wiped out by the Sioux and Cheyenne warriors, led by Chiefs Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull, in what has famously become known as Custer's Last Stand. My dear mother, I remember telling a reporter that she knew I was going to grow up as an unusual boy, because when I was a kid, I was always on the side of the Red Indians, as we called them, in those uneducated days. And I remember watching Custer's Last Stand, clenching my fist and cheering on Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse. On June the 25th in 1950, the Korean War began when North Korean troops made incursions into the south at several points along the border. The war lasted 3 years and cost 2 million lives. In music, in 1984, Prince released his epic Purple Rain. And earlier, in 1967, the first global satellite TV show was broadcast, culminating in the Beatles performing All You Need Is Love. Now, let me tell you that in 1999, on board a red London Routemaster bus, with 11 of my hardy fellows, we entered the besieged city of Baghdad, blaring that very song, All You Need Is Love, to the crowd that had gathered to greet us, which was 3 million strong. The largest welcome ever given to any British people anywhere in the world in all history. 3 million people as our bus inched through them singing All You Need Is Love. You can watch it, actually. There's a video of it. It's called Big Ben to Baghdad, narrated by the Oscar-winning actress Julie Christie. And on this week in 1963, US President John F. Kennedy made his famous Ich bin ein Berliner speech in which he was seen as a turning point in the Cold War. It's just as well he wasn't in Hamburg, huh? And finally, on June 27th, in 1950, the link between smoking and lung cancer was proven after a 25-year study by Britain's Medical Research Council. That's 1950. And by the end of this year, the World Health Organization expects the worldwide annual death toll directly caused by smoking to reach 10 million, causing almost 1/5 of all deaths in developed countries. A staggering 1 billion may die from smoking this century. Puts the coronavirus into some kind of perspective. That was the very somber week that was. Let's talk to Stephen in Hillhead. Go ahead, Stephen.
How's my old friend getting on here, Mr. Galloway?
Oh, good. Thank you very much. Now, don't get barred again. I've let you back.
Aye, but you're still preaching us about history lessons away back and custard and all the great wars. Yes.
Long live Sitting Bull. Long live Crazy Horse.
Yes.
Down with cowardly Custer.
Aye, but see, the end of the day, George, the world's not learned from the atrocities years ago. There's still killings on the streets. Just no matter what part of the planet you're on. Where does it stop, George? And they're using all these BLM movements, the Green Brigade, anything at all, about any party you want for protests in the streets, George. Folk will need to look all in the mirror and say, enough is enough, George.
Yeah, but it is interesting that the only two organizations you mentioned were the Black Lives Matter and the Green Brigade of highly political Celtic supporters. Are you a Rangers man, Stephen?
No, I'm certainly not, George. I wouldn't like to be associated with Glasgow Rangers. And it's not just the BLM lives that matters. All lives matters. It doesn't matter what ethnic minority you are here, George.
Of course,
because I think it's racist. I think it's racist people. I think it's racist. The people out there shouting like Black Lives Matter.
Do you?
What about the white people?
Do you?
What about the packet of these other people that matter?
Well, as I put it,
I think it's a disgrace to be carrying on.
Yeah. Again, I repeat, it's black people and Catholics at Parkhead that you've singled out for opprobrium. And people will draw. People will draw their own conclusions from that. Of course, if your wife asks you if you love her, it would be the wrong moment to answer, "I love everybody." It would be true, but it would be the wrong thing to say. If your colleague tells you, "My father died today," it would be the wrong moment to say, "Everybody's father dies." It would be true, but it would not be the right thing to say. So at this point in time, when people are recoiling in horror at the lynching of black men in the United States of America in 2020, it's the wrong moment to answer, "All lives matter." Of course, all lives matter. White lives matter. British lives matter. Reading lives matter. Latino lives matter. Of course. But the black people have suffered for 400 years. Can you not give them 4 weeks in which you answer empathetically, "Yes, black lives matter"? I knew it was a mistake to let you back in. Sean is in Lanarkshire. Might get more sense out of him. Go ahead, Sean.
Hi, George. How's it going, mate?
All right. Good to hear from you.
Yes. George, I'd like to talk about people anywhere kind of marching, both within the UK and the USA. I believe that the people are marching towards their enemies now. I think, in my estimation of what's happening in our countries, both the representations of the people have been subverted. I think that we are heading towards totalitarianism. Our parliament are now defending neoliberalism ideology as opposed to the people, and they're proving liars to the people. But now the people are marching to them, and they're asking them to change things. They're asking liars and not defenders of them to change things. So they're going in the wrong direction. We live in a representative democracy for the people, George. You know that, don't you? You know that well. And one of the key elements of that, George, is truthful journalism. So let's talk about racism for a wee second. And let's talk about racism against cultures, George. And let's talk about racist campaigns from government towards truthful journalists, George. Let's talk about that racism, but wait a moment. Let me move on. Let's talk about people that are marching, George, because they're marching for laws, they're marching for rights, and they're marching for justice. But nothing matters without truth. Nothing. And we face lies. And our government won't give us the information to let us decide whether they are lying, but we know they are. So
the liars have made it a crime to call them out as liars. That's why Julian Assange is languishing in Belmarsh prison.
Exactly. That's where I'm going with this, George. We have truth. The best guy in the business. I love this guy. And that, I've never said that about many men. My father, that's it. But I love this man. And this man is our leader. And we're looking for leaders these days. And we're also looking for truth from everything, aren't we? And the best guy in the business, George, remember, we're great at stuff, Britain, eh? Great. But we're great at locking truth up forever. And everybody's looking for it. But he's in Belmarsh, George. And we're marching to the liars that put him there.
Very powerful, Sean. Thank you very much for it. Julian Assange is in Britain's Guantanamo Bay. It was only last week, after 12 months of incarceration as an unconvicted, untried prisoner, that he was allowed a radio in his cell, that he is forced to remain in for 23 and a half out of every 24 hours. That is cruel, vindictive, unusual, unjust treatment. And although I understand many things, I ought to, I've lived them, I will never understand how Britain, even within its own terms, in seeking to extradite Julian, has lent itself to this mean and vindictive, cruel and atrocious persecution of Julian Assange, which is writing its name in blood, in history, that will live forever. Not many people in Britain today care about Julian Assange. I'm here to tell you that. But generations to come, and in the history of this period, Britain's atrocious, vindictive, cruel treatment of Julian Assange will be one of the ugliest chapters in even our less than illustrious history. Let me take a quick break.
Radio Sputnik.
We call Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan the most disruptive radio show in America.
It's a great show and we have a lot of fun.
We come to you live from Washington, D.C. every Monday through Friday morning.
What I like best is that we bring in experts from all over the world. From Barcelona, from Egypt, from Seoul, South Korea.
From Newark, New Jersey. We try to bring people great guests, great calls from our listeners, and of course, stupid jokes. And we do it with two hosts that have very different viewpoints. Now, here's the thing, Garland. A lot of people would think you and I would just argue. I mean, I'm a Republican Trump supporter.
And of course, I am a progressive Democrat Bernie Sanders supporter.
The surprising thing is how much we actually agree on.
And you won't be surprised because you're going to find out just how much you agree and just how much you enjoy this show.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
My poll is still running. Should foreign criminals be deported straight from jail at the end of their sentences? A, yes, 87%, up 1. B, no, 13%, down 1. More than 1,000 people have voted. I'm determined that that number should be 90%. If you haven't voted yet, please vote on my Twitter feed. Paul says, commit any crime, get deported. Easy, innit? And Bitcoin North says, I'm flabbergasted that 13% say no. Are there that many Libyans in Manchester? Very good. George says, depends on their legal status in this country. Illegals usually are when caught and convicted of a crime. Of course, sending them back to places that immediately puts their lives at risk must be a consideration. More transparency from the security services wouldn't go amiss. And Nadia says, why? Criminals should get their trial and punishment in the place they commit their crimes. The most important thing is the punishment. If it is guaranteed in the place they should be deported to, why would you deport? The answer to that, Nadia, is we've already got enough criminals of our own. Why should we harbour Libyan criminals? We don't have to have them here. We have to have our own people here. Why should we allow a Libyan criminal sent to prison for violent offences allowed to remain here after prison and then go on to murder good British people in broad daylight, and to the trauma, lifetime trauma, of everyone who witnessed it? My goodness, Liberals everywhere. Nigel says, do Yorkshire Tea pay you for product placement? If not, they ought to. Except it isn't Yorkshire Tea. It's Redbush tea in a Yorkshire Tea mug. I don't drink Yorkshire Tea, so that's any payment for product placement now impossible. John says, my daughter gave me one of your books for Father's Day, the Fidel Castro Handbook. I look forward to reading it. Thanks, John, and thanks to your daughter. Enjoy. Dan says, happy Father's Day, Mr. Galloway. Thank you, Dan. Richard says, the world is turning into a dystopian nightmare. And an Instagram user says, there is no normal anymore. Wild Survivor says, George is the David Attenborough of politics. Not sure what that means, but if it's a compliment, thank you, Wild Survivor. And on Facebook, Vanto says, George is the real deal. Greetings from South Africa. Thank you very much indeed. And hello to all my friends in South Africa. And Ray says, the Libyan refugee is also a Christian convert. He fled Libya 7 years ago to get away from the Islamist militia. Did he? Aye. Is that right, Ray? On you go. And Mark says the UK police are very different from the US police. Don't compare, please. Well, I think I dealt with that myself. Let's hear from Chris in Colchester. Go ahead, Chris.
Hi, George.
Hi.
Yeah, just because I'm arguing with you doesn't mean I dislike you. So, you know, you don't want to block all your dissenters, do you?
No, not at all. You're most welcome. Go ahead.
No, you're all right, really. Just politics aside, I think you're all right. But, I just think about, with regards to COVID, it's not all black and white. You know, if it is what you're saying it is, then Japan has had less than 1,000 deaths and they never locked down. So there's been no second wave there. They've kept open the whole time. And I just think we need to look at the lockdown isn't some miracle cure. Myself, I don't want to use this as emotional propaganda, but I just think there's other sides to stuff. My dad died last Friday, and I blame the lockdown. I blame the government for letting the virus into the country. But I just think that he was 87, and it took away a lot in his life that he had before, and I've seen this with other family members as well. I think it should have been a choice, the lockdown. So I just think it's not always, you know, there's got to be some nuance here. I'm against the lockdown, but it doesn't mean I want old people to die, of course. But I think our government and our establishment's got a track record of killing off elderly people.
You're right.
But I think the main point that we can all agree on is what the government surely knew. We've all seen Edward Snowden's film about Citizen 4. They're watching everything. They're spying on everything. Apparently there was cases here in Europe in November last year. Did they not know the virus was here last year? It just doesn't. It can't go unpunished.
Well, look, I'll tell you what, Chris. From my vantage point of greater years than you, never imagine that we're run by James Bonds. Never imagine that they know what you, Chris, in Colchester, are doing, because that is a dystopian delusion. This lot couldn't run a piss-up in a brewery. This lot couldn't run a menage. The idea that the British and American states are somehow capable of monitoring their populations, of controlling their populations, is a stratagem of absolute defeatism. And it imagines our leaders to be James Bonds rather than Austin Powers. And I honestly caution against it, because I have known our rulers over many decades now, known them personally, seen them up close and personal. And believe me, they're Austin Powers. They're Mr. Bean. Let's go to Lee in Sheffield. Go ahead, Lee.
Hello, George. You all right?
I'm good, sir.
Yeah, I remember that actually talking about the people's history of the United States a few weeks ago, but I heard my voice on the radio, and I just could not. It sounds terrible, but anyway, I'm even here to give it another go.
Go on, you go. You don't sound terrible at all. I love the Sheffield accent. Go ahead. I saw you advertised on the Facebook about you were talking about the USS Liberty. Yeah.
And I meant to read the article I've got in a book here. I'm just going to come to this in a moment. And what was very, very interesting, just to add some other things that this guy says, and it's a book called On Intelligence by a bloke called John Hughes Wilson. He was in the British Army for 30 years. I've read it, and I've got no reason to not believe what he says, and he quotes different sources. But a few things that do come to mind when he was talking. He says, for a start, where the USS Liberty was, they were almost certainly privy, i.e. listening to the communications, to the El Arish massacre of Egyptian soldiers during the war. And hello?
Yeah, I'm going. Go on.
Yeah, and they were almost certainly privy to listening to the communications going on due to that. And just some other points. It was apparently a US nuclear submarine captured pictures of the attack through the periscope. The captain, I think they called him McGonigal, he was awarded for his role in saving the ship because he was critical. Obviously, he performed critical damage upon it. He was awarded the Medal of Honor. Normally, this is a big ceremony in the White House. It was carried out down at Washington Navy Yard, which is about 3 miles down the river. And apparently
that's below the salt, isn't it?
Yeah, and apparently the State Department actually informed and asked the Israelis whether they'd have any objection to it being awarded this.
Now that is a special relationship, Lee.
Indeed, special. Well, don't get me going on that one. But the other, just my final point is, and he just says this was published a few years, 2 or 3 years ago, I think this book was, and he does say in the afterword, the one point Israel has never wavered on is that no flags or identification were being flown from that ship when every veteran, everyone who on the ship, and there was a Soviet frigate nearby who asked if they wanted assistance as well, plus US Navy ships, everybody can attest that there was identification and flags being flown.
There was the small matter of its name being emblazoned across the front bow of the ship. The US Liberty is clearly marked. And then there's the holiday colours that they were flying, an extra large version of the Stars and Stripes. A great call, Lee. Never be shy to call.
Just one more thing, George.
Quickly.
One quote that is recorded in the book. Admiral Thomas H. Maurer, former Chief of the Joint Chief of Staff, quote, I have to conclude that it was Israel's intent to sink the Liberty and leave as few survivors as possible. Israel knew perfectly well that ship was American.
I've got no doubt whatsoever about that.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm really just wondering why they did it now, and I think we may get some elucidation on that in the third hour of the show. Thanks for that, Lee. Let's go to Francis in Bedfordshire. Go ahead, Francis.
Hello, George. Can you hear me?
Yes, very clear. Go ahead.
Well, you were on about sending the criminals back, or should they stay?
Yeah.
I voted to send them back.
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah. Me too.
Reason is we've got too many criminals as it is in
Exactly.
England, so
Why deliberately harbour more?
yeah, they ought to do more. I think they ought to make a special ship, a really big mother of all mothership, and send them in the middle of nowhere, remote control, and do their times quietly.
What do you mean, that they serve their time on a ship?
On a ship, in the middle of nowhere.
A prison ship?
And that is correct, George.
Okay, that's a novel suggestion. Thanks for it, Francis. Now, the Everton-Liverpool game finished 0-0. And I just want you to recall that I predicted at the beginning of this show that this would be a dull and uneventful game. And once again, my prediction has come to pass. I really need to start doing the polls. Now, the final results of the poll, 87% of you agree with me that foreign criminals should be deported straight from jail at the end of their sentence. And 13% of you liberals say no. Thank you very much indeed to the 1,131 people who voted in that poll. Time for a couple of social media points, I think. Here is, Nigel asked about the product placement. Of course, it isn't Yorkshire tea, so I'm not going to be getting any money. No Arkwright this week, no Colombo, because it's too hot in here to do a show in a Mac. Yeah, that's me out of social media. Bring me some more, please. I'll be back for the third hour after the news with Jamie Lowe.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Tune in every Tuesday to Loud and Clear for a regular segment called False Prophets, a weekly look at Wall Street and corporate capitalism, where we talk about the big economic issues of the week from the point of view of working people, the poor, and the U.S. position in the global economy. Join us this Tuesday and every Tuesday with financial policy analyst Daniel Sankey right here on Radio Sputnik.
It's time to double down with Max and Stacy.
Yeah, double down. We're talking markets, finance, business, economics, ka-ching, bling, just about everything money related on Sputnik. It's called Double Down.
We're asking, are dead cats bouncing or have fundamentals changed? That's this week on Double Down.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
The man held on suspicion of killing 3 people in a terrorist attack at a park in Reading on Saturday night has been named as Kari Sadala. It's understood that he is a 25-year-old Libyan asylum seeker who was living in the town. He is also believed to have served a short UK prison sentence. Sadala was arrested at the scene, and police say they are not looking for anyone else over what has been designated a terrorist incident. Eyewitnesses have described seeing a man with a large knife randomly attacking groups of people gathered in the park. Prime Minister Boris Johnson said he was appalled and sickened by the attack in Thornbury Gardens around 7 p.m. last night. Metropolitan Police Assistant Commissioner Neil Basu, head of counter-terrorism policing, described it as an atrocity. He added that investigators are not looking for anyone else in connection with the attack. 2 men have died in a shooting after a lockdown party which involved hundreds of people. Police were called after reports that a gunshot had been heard in Caythorpe Street and Moss Side, Manchester at about 1 a.m. this morning. The 2 victims, aged in their 20s and 30s, self-presented in hospital and died a short time later. Greater Manchester Police said the shooting had happened at an unplanned event near to the location of an earlier community event. No arrests have yet been made. The UK government is expected to reduce the 2-metre social distancing rule to 1 metre in England this week. Health Secretary Matt Hancock said the distance could be lowered with mitigations to cut the risk of transmission. He confirmed new easing of lockdown measures would be announced in the coming days, including whether pubs and restaurants in England can reopen on the 4th of July. Teenage social media and TikTok users are understood to be behind the smaller than expected numbers at US President Donald Trump's campaign rally in Tulsa yesterday. The Trump campaign had boasted of 1 million requests for free tickets. But in the event, the 19,000-seat arena was only half full. Teenage opponents had apparently ordered thousands of free tickets without intending to turn up. Trump's campaign manager had blamed radical protesters and the media. Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, a leading Democrat politician, praised the young people she said had flooded the Trump campaign with fake ticket reservations. There had been health concerns about holding the rally, the first of its kind since lockdown measures began in many US states. Those attending the rally had to sign a waiver protecting the Trump campaign from responsibility for any illness. Hours before the event began, officials said 6 staff members involved in organising the rally had tested positive for COVID-19. In his speech, Trump said, "When you do testing to that extent, you're going to find more people. You will find more cases." The world champion Formula One racing driver Lewis Hamilton has announced plans to set up a commission in his name to increase diversity in motorsport. He said he wants the Hamilton Commission to make a real tangible and measurable change. He said, "Despite my success in the sport, the institutional barriers that have kept F1 highly exclusive persist. It's not enough to point to me or to a single new black hire as a meaningful example of progress." Hamilton said his commission would explore how motorsport can be used to engage more young people from black backgrounds with science, technology, engineering and maths subjects. And finally, the Irish Taoiseach Leo Varadkar has answered a bet challenge and proved he is something of a pop culture expert by quoting from the Mean Girls movie in his coronavirus news conference. Varadkar slipped in a reference to the 2014 classic as he announced a further rolling back of COVID-19 restrictions on Friday. He said, "Some have asked whether there is a limit to what we can achieve," before drawing upon a line from the hit movie. "My answer is that the limit does not exist." The quote was taken from the scene in which protagonist Katie Heron, played by Lindsay Lohan, answers a question about limits to win a maths competition for her school. The Lord of the Rings and the Goonies star Sean Astin, who played Samwise Gamgee in the Middle-earth trilogy, bet the Irish leader 50 quid to quote Mean Girls in his next speech. And I expect that cheque is now in the post. But that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Now, who would you erect a statue to if you had the power to do so right now? A, Jeremy Corbyn. B, Julian Assange. C, Barack Obama. Or you can suggest your own idea on my Twitter feed. You can vote now at George Galloway on Twitter. Now, as I said earlier in the show, there's a dramatic development on the coronavirus in Germany, where the R rate, the rate of reproduction, the rate of transmission has risen dramatically over a 4-day period and is now 2.88, meaning that for every person who's got it, they will pass it on to almost 3 other people. You don't have to be Alan Turing to work out the mathematics of that. It is a truly horrifying new development. And I'm hoping that our own Moats medic, the redoubtable Ranjeet Brar, doctor, physician, surgeon, who's helped us through this whole issue throughout the entire period, is joining me now. Dr. Ranjeet, thank you again for joining us. Now, about the German R number, it is a horrifying development. It's gone up from 1.75 to 2.88 in 4 days. That's alarming, and no reason to believe it only operates like that in Germany, is there?
I think that's right, George. Thanks again for having me back with you. We have said from the beginning that the facts that we have established about coronavirus are well known and have been known throughout the course of the pandemic from January, really. So we know this is an exceptionally infective agent, much more infective than the common flu and much more deadly than the common flu in terms of its propensity to develop this severe viral pneumonia. That's why we are treating it so very differently from the flu. And of course, the R number, the reproductive number, has been widely different according to social circumstances, which is why it spreads more rapidly in some places than others. But left to the normal conditions of the world, there were several studies that looked at it, and it was found to be between 2.5 and as high as 6 in initial studies of outbreaks. And so that's why this massive raft of measures to suppress its spread, to social distancing measures, essentially, as well as all of the many attempts we've seen to have varying degrees of lockdown in different countries throughout the world, are precisely to suppress the spread of this virus. India initially reported very low numbers, and recently seems to have lifted its lockdown and found a huge increase in surge in cases and has had to go back into a second lockdown. Germany, of course, we thought did very well initially, both because it had a large number of ventilated beds, probably as many as 40 or 50,000 compared to us in the UK, who normally only have 4,000, and were able to increase towards that 8,000 number. We thought that they'd done well. They had a very good regime of testing, and therefore had much better sight of the virus. But this particular increase in the R number seems to have come from a number of small outbreaks. One in particular, there was a German meat packing factory where there were over 1,000 new cases that were found to have spread from that factory alone. So when people work in close conditions, close to each other, one person having the virus can spread it onto many, many more. And there can be a rapid change with the lifting of lockdown measures and a lower state of vigilance, if you like, as we start to move back towards normal life, which everyone is keen to do. We do leave ourselves exposed precisely to this, and partly because we know already the virus actually has affected a very low percentage of the population, much less than 10 in Germany, probably still around 7% of the population in Britain only.
Well, we all want to get back to normal life, but we don't want death. Even on a quiet day, well over 100 people are dying in Britain. In fact, I think 123 or so today. It's always quieter at weekends, slower reporting. It's likely that on Monday and Tuesday, that will be higher than that. And we have effectively no lockdown now, do we? Right from the beginning, the shops were open, the food shops were open, supermarkets were open, Marks and Spencer was open. You could go in and buy food, but you could also buy shoes. I know that because I did. So that's been followed by building workers back right from more or less from the beginning. I think they were never furloughed. And now the furlough is coming to an end. And there's a huge agitation God knows why, but to get people back into pubs and scrapping even the ineffectual 2-metre rule. It seems to me obvious, I'm not as learned as you, that the closer you get to a greater number of people, the more risk there is of you giving it to them or them giving it to you.
I think that's exactly right. Going back to your first point, George, several good points there. Going back to your first point in terms of the actual numbers of cases, if this is the end of the first wave, it's got a very long tail. I was looking at the numbers of cases, the daily cases, precisely trying to look at this because it's hard to correlate day after day. And if we go back 3 weeks ago, over the whole of the week, there were just over 2,000 cases. 2 weeks ago, 1,200 cases. This week, or just shy of 1,000 cases. And so really, whether we've dipped and the cases are rising again, certainly they're more this Sunday than last Sunday, though we know those figures get updated. There's every sign that those numbers are starting to drift up again rather than continue on their downward trajectory. But there's less emphasis on that in our news reporting. There's more and more emphasis on how to get business functioning, how to open airlines, on bridges between countries, air bridges so-called, i.e. allowing travel between countries. British people are to be let back into Spain and other places. And people are happy to go to their second homes or to go to their favourite holiday destinations, no doubt. But all of this affords far greater scope for the virus to spread freely. The reopening of schools, and still, our NHS is really at a straining point. It's trying to open normal services, but we know that there are 10 million or more cases of people waiting for appointments, waiting for procedures. The BMA has done a survey this week and showing that a high percentage, more than 40% of its staff feel unable to cope, feel stressed, feel that they're exhausted essentially by the last few weeks of the course of this pandemic and the effect it's had on them in their professional working and themselves personally not knowing whether they're safe and their family are safe. So our ability to cope with a second major wave is certainly open to question.
Now, the truthfulness of the government has frequently been called into question. And I saw an article this week which said that for 22 solid days, 22 consecutive days, our actual death rate was over 1,000. And the government deliberately manipulated those figures so that on no single day were 1,000 deaths reported, because they saw that it would be totemic, symbolic, alarming. So high numbers of 960, 970, 980 were recorded. But the true figure for 22 solid days in a row was over 1,000. That's a lot of deaths, Doctor.
It certainly is. And I think, it comes back to that initial question of how do we know the true extent of the mortality from this condition. And I think excess mortality is a good way of looking at it. Of course, that will reflect slightly the fact that the NHS really was overwhelmed and we shut down normal activity, but it's very likely, looking at those excess mortality figures, that actually more than 65,000 people have so far succumbed to this problem. And as we say, if 7% of the population only have been exposed to it, now it may well be that some of the most vulnerable of our population have sadly been taken and that we don't see such a huge wave, but there's certainly no guarantee of that. As we know, people in their 30s, 40s, 50s and 60s are all susceptible to the ill effects of coronavirus. And it still is very possible, and it still is a great concern that we're going to be seeing a second wave of infection.
Dr. Ranjeet Brar, thank you, as always, for helping us on the mother of all talk shows. Who would you erect a statue to now? A, Jeremy Corbyn, 27%. B, Julian Assange, 61%. C, Barack Obama, 12%. Who are that 12%? Or you can suggest your own idea on my Twitter feed. Vote now. George Galloway on Twitter, at George Galloway. 463 votes in so far. You've got about 45 minutes to erect your statue. In response to the poll, 20% Tom says Adolf Hitler, not for the Holocaust, of course, for his works with children. This is a spoof, of course, on the slaver statues that have been in the news. The statue was not because they were a slaver. It was because they gave a lot to charity from the blood money that they made at the slaving. And Lazy Coconut says, I'd rather see a statue of your good self for all of your great efforts throughout the years. Thank you very much, but no thanks. I've always respected the pigeon. It knows where to defecate. Alex says, Sir Winston Churchill, every street should have one. And Adam says, nobody political. This poll is like, would you like to be left hooked, right hooked, or uppercutted? How about David Beckham? I think James Corden knows a good statue maker. And Tom says, Mother Teresa or Che Guevara. Wesley says, Assange, Corbyn and Obama are both UN stooges. That's a new allegation. And Daz says, great show again, George. It's no coincidence that many of these terrorist individuals have spent time in our prison system. Lots of impressionable people to be radicalized. What happened to Colombo this week? Well, as I say, you can't actually, it's boiling in here. You cannot present a show in a fawn-coloured raincoat. But just one more thing. On Facebook, Gunther says, how is Trump racist? Oh, dear. Please give specific incidents. How long have you got, Gunther? And Aaron says, in America, white man can safely put his hand in the glove compartment to get his details. A black man has the fear of getting shot, always. The black man is twice as likely to be shot than the white. That's the reality. Indeed, that's the case. Understated, in fact. It's 4 times as likely. Gilbert is in Los Angeles. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Gilbert.
Hello, how you doing, George?
Good, nice to hear from you.
Excellent. 99% of the time I agree with you. Today, though, there was a point that kind of irked me enough to have me call, and it was your comparison of leadership, global leadership, being basically klutches. I believe the term you used were more of Austin Powers than James Bond.
Yeah.
So, and I think that oversimplifies geopolitics too much, because at the end of the day, whatever government or organization which is being targeted by a nation state, there's too many factors to just simplify it. For example, Britain and America and Israel are targeting Venezuela right now. The thing is, the Venezuelan people are very organized and they're very committed to their revolution. Now, you have an example where you have a supposed leftist government in Bolivia, which was easily toppled. And once again, to compare the CIA or, MI6 to Austin Powers, when in reality, if we look at the history of, whether their relations to narco traffickers or coup d'etats from, Arbens in Guatemala, assassinations of Trujillo, coups in Brazil, what they did to the Sandinistas, the Iran-Contra, drug trafficking. I think it does a disservice to your audience to do that. That's basically my point. I think for the most part we agree, but I think, Austin Powers,
Gilbert, all you've established is the venality of the deep state in your country and mine, and I'm hardly a person who's going to dispute that. The question is the efficacy, and their efficacy is much closer to Austin Powers than to James Bond. There are a lot of people out there that think themselves on the left who imagine that in the building next door to me and in the building across the river from me are finely tuned Rolls-Royce James Bond machines. But they're not. And most of the time, they are stumbling from one cock-up, one blunder, one catastrophe to the next one. That's all I'm trying to say.
And I agree for the most part. I think the one other point that must be made in that argument you just made, though, is that a lot of times the blunders are the ones that we find out about. All their successes we find out, 20, 30 years later when, documents are declassified. Because there's way more successes, George.
Most of it is Gilbert, most of it's in plain sight now. Mr. Bean, can you describe the Bay of Piglets the other week in Venezuela when a group of mercenaries, some of them serving U.S. military personnel, arrive on the beach in Venezuela and are captured by fisherwomen?
But once again, though, hold on, though, George. That is, once again, thanks to the legacy of the great leader, Hugo Chavez, who reorganized the civic-military relation in that country. Where you're right, it was a Bay of Piglets where you got, Jordan Goudreau, this mercenary, basically, offering his services for $200 million to Guaido with a, $50 million advance. It's ludicrous. But then we have a case in Bolivia where those U.S.-trained military leaders in the country basically staged a coup and were able to successfully take out Evo Morales.
Gilbert, but for every successful operation like Bolivia, there's a Libya, there's an Iraq, there's an Afghanistan.
Iraq was a success, George. Libya was a success. Where is all that gold? Where is Gaddafi's gold?
Well, a lot of thieves got rich.
Let's be honest. Where is Saddam Hussein's gold?
Well, a lot of thieves got rich, but that doesn't make it a success. Nobody in the whole world now can look at the disaster in Iraq and say that it wasn't that it was James Bond that done it. Just because some thieves got rich, it doesn't make it a success. It's a catastrophic failure, as is Libya.
But George, a success for who? Of course, it's not a success for the Iraqis.
It's not a success for the world.
For the American taxpayer who has to pay trillions of dollars for the war.
It was a success. Success only
it's a huge success for the capitalists. For the thieves
look.
How many
Libya,
contracts?
How many people are making money in Libya today?
George, Iyad Alawi, who was the prime minister of Iraq, was a former CIA asset. Once again, we have to ask a success for who?
And he got a very, very small percentage when the elections came. You're missing my point. I've asked you, how many people are making money in Libya today?
The weapons manufacturers. How much black money, which is a black budget, is being right now generated through all. First off, we have a lot. And first off, the U.S. thought they were going to be able to control Haftar, and Haftar is now basically going to take over.
Well, but you're right. The Libyan economy has gone through the floor. There is no possibility of any Western businessman going to Libya. They would be kidnapped within the first 5 hours of their arrival in their hotel. Trade has collapsed. The idea that they had, that they clearly were working on a plan to invade and topple Gaddafi and then harvest Libya's natural resources is now laughable, absolutely laughable. Libya does not produce any oil. It cannot export any oil. There's 3 governments, 4 parliaments, and 3 armies, at least 3 armies, and 50 militia. It is a complete basket case. And therefore, the people who thought it was a good idea are better described as Austin Powers than James Bond. Thanks. Been a pleasure disagreeing with you. Let me go to Rashid in Long Beach, because I'd love to be there in Long Beach right now. Go ahead, Rashid.
Sunny as always, George. Sunny as always.
Of course.
George, I just wanted to follow up on what Mr. Gallo had said, and I want to emphasize 53 years of complicity between the United States government and the Israeli government. That the day of the attack of the Liberty, the Israeli jets flew over it, reconnaissance the plane, the ship, identified it as an American ship. flew back, and yet they still engaged in an attack. There were IAF communications where the pilots radioed back to headquarters that it's an American ship, and they were told, record it, go ahead, attack it, it's an order. So they bombed 850 missile shots and gunfire. They came back with motor torpedo boats, dropped 2 torpedoes into the ship, and then they came back with Marines on attack helicopters. But if you have a chance to talk to the other survivors, they'll tell you they were going to fight to the last man. And I think the Israelis understood that. And the other news is that once the word got out and the intelligence platform around the world knew what was going on, they pulled away. They couldn't sink that ship because it had survived traveling across the Atlantic as a double-hulled ship at the end of World War II. It was ready for U-boats, not just Israeli motor torpedo boats. But I want to emphasize that the USS Liberty was the most advanced sensing platform in the world at the time as a naval ship. It could listen to anything, and it was completely wired in to know that the Israelis instigated the Six-Day War, that they preemptively attacked Jordan, they preemptively attacked Egypt, and they preemptively attacked Syria, that they were listening and they heard the massacre of the Egyptian prisoners of war in the Sinai. All of that was captured by the Liberty, and all of that had to be erased. And more importantly, as you've mentioned, the supergluing of the United States to Israel, there's been a current within multiple American administrations, within the Congress. They're all part of this, and that's to get America engaged ultimately in the wars in the Middle East, which they finally successfully have done. And it didn't matter who would get killed along the way. That was the ultimate goal.
Yeah, I mean, as a false flag, it's a particularly bloody one, isn't it? It's one thing constructing a fake narrative like the Tonkin affair, but to actually facilitate the slaughter of a significant number of your own service personnel and then cover it up. As crimes go, that's a particularly heinous one.
Well, let me give you more to the crime. The fact that that supergluing of the nations together by 1992 had been so strong that the Clinton administration, the U.S. federal government, started subsidizing American police forces to travel to Israel and learn from the IDF on how to take care of troublemakers, i.e. the Palestinians. And those techniques for the last 20 years have surfaced across military police stations around the United States where sergeants, captains, regular guys are flown at taxpayer expense, U.S. federal taxpayer expense, state taxpayer expense, local city taxpayer expense to Israel for training where they learn how to put their knees on the necks of troublemakers such as Mr. Floyd. So what we're seeing in America is the Israelification of our police departments. And that's 53 years of complicity known by multiple presidents, known by congressmen, known by the judiciary, and completely accepted even by our major media.
Very powerful, Rashid. Thank you very much for that excellent call. Joshua in London on, I think, the same subject. Go ahead, Joshua.
Yeah, George, okay, this is probably the frankest call you're ever going to get from me, and it's intended to sort of, if you like, call a spade a spade. But it is not intended in any way to be defamatory. But do you think maybe instead of Jewish survivors from the Holocaust being given a homeland in Israel, do you think that Germany, Nazi Germany being the perpetrator of the Holocaust, do you think since it gave up relinquished territory, or was forced to relinquish territory to the Soviet Union and Poland, both countries of which it partially exterminated their populations, do you think it should have also been expected to give a bit of its land for a Jewish sanctuary, or do you think that would have been wrong?
Well, I think that the survivors of the Holocaust, the last place in the whole world they would have entrusted their family and their security to would be in Germany. I do think it is extraordinary that Germany has gotten away, as indeed has Japan, with the wartime atrocities, and have become lionized and patronized in all kinds of ways, both Germany and Japan, whilst Russia, which bore the brunt of the Nazi onslaught and was the most decisive factor in its defeat, is now our enemy. I think that is one of the great perversities of history, of recent history, in the history of people that are still alive and listening, watching this show tonight. So I don't think directly your point I would agree with, but the inference I draw from your point is that the Palestinians paid the price for European anti-Semitism and pogrom and genocide. And that seems to be so unjust as to be such a standout that I have been in no doubt all my life where I stand on it.
Yeah, well, and my sort of, the inference, I'm sure, the additional inference you can gather from that is, well, I know this sounds maybe a little bit, a little bit hateful, but let's be honest, George, you'd rather, man to man, you'd rather the German lands be given up for the Jews, for Jewish people or Jewish refugees than the poor Palestinians.
Well,
let's be honest now.
Yeah, well, actually, most of the Jewish survivors of the Holocaust wanted to go to the United States and or Britain and or France. But these great supporters of Israel slammed their doors on these poor, wretched survivors of an attempted genocide. And that is an extraordinary truth, that most of them, as far as we can tell, and there's a lot of studies on this, did not want to go to Palestine. But the doors of everywhere else were closed to them. And therefore, it was Palestine or nothing. Thanks, Joshua. Slightly off topic, but interestingly, let's take a 60-second break, and then I've got the mother of all calls on the US Liberty.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Tune in every Thursday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for the regular segment called Veterans for Peace, where we focus on the contemporary issues of war and peace that affect veterans, their families, the country, and the world as a whole. Veterans for Peace President Jerry Condon joins the show every Thursday. Hear about this and more every Thursday right here on Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The mother of all talk shows, with George Galloway. The world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
So, who would you erect a statue to now? That's the poll that's running on my Twitter feed, at George Galloway on Twitter. A, Jeremy Corbyn, 29%. B, Julian Assange, 59%. C, Barack Obama, 12%. Or you can suggest your own idea. Georgie says, Lord Sugar has stated that he doesn't know anyone that has died from COVID-19, thereby downplaying its propensity for harm and demonstrating how out of touch he is. Of course, he just wants to accumulate more wealth at any cost. Now, Chris Plumley, a man I have interviewed before, know well, has written a good deal on the USS Liberty. Let's hear his perspective on it. Chris, welcome.
Hello, George. Good evening to you.
Good evening. Now, what do you think of what we've heard so far on the show tonight about the USS Liberty? Any holes in the arguments?
Well, to be honest, George, I hadn't been listening, mate. I'm awfully sorry to have to say that, but I've just been wall-to-wall calls, and I've literally just got through to your producer to say, come on. Well, I'm sorry, mate.
No, it's all right. Let me recap The former president of the USS Liberty Veterans Association talked us through in a very dignified and powerful way the events of that day. And he is in no doubt at all that the attack on the USS Liberty was a joint Israeli Johnson White House operation, that there was a deliberate attack on the ship, no question of mistaken identity, and a clear war aim, the aim being to directly draw the United States into the 1967 Arab-Israeli War. Over to you.
Exactly. That's quite right. That's a good summary. You can see how it all worked. I mean, there was such a blatant, deliberate attempt to sink that ship, and it was only the amazing tenacity of the sailors that managed to keep it afloat, because if it had sunk, that would have been it. So it was just their efforts that kept it afloat that prevented World War III. You know, I mean, it's an extraordinary situation that the President of the United States recalled the F-16s, which were going to rescue the ship. They were going to protect the ship. And they were recalled they'd taken off, it's been scrambled, and they were about to defend the ship, and they were recalled to the aircraft carrier, told not to go there, which was, you can imagine the disappointment of the crew when they heard that, and they were fighting for their lives. There was a deliberate attempt to sink it, and the hush that was put over the whole thing afterwards, you know, and the threats that were given to anyone that spoke, made it even more profound that that's what happened. And there was a deliberate, that Cold War warrior mentality that existed in the Pentagon at that period was just off the scale, really off the scale. And they were the main instigators, I think, of that whole thing. I think they had to silence that ship because it was watching, the Israelis had promised not to occupy the Golan. I think that was one of the stipulations for the assistance that the Americans gave them, was that they weren't to occupy the Golan. They started to occupy the Golan, watched by the ship, and I think as soon as they realized there was a spy ship watching them, they went for it, and then they involved the rest of the CIA, the Cold War warriors in the Pentagon, and said, right, this is the opportunity, let's go for it. And we can sink it, and then we can blame the Russians, because there was a Russian fleet in the Mediterranean at the same time as well. So I think there was a big game plan going on here, and had the boat sunk, I think that would have been it. I think we would have, a very different picture would have arisen.
Why do you think so few people know of this episode? You know, we're talking about the 1960s, not the 1860s. We're talking about an attack on a warship of the United States of America. Why is this not a much bigger story than it is?
It's the control of the media again. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but I think it goes right all the way back to that sort of period when they realized they've got to start clamping down on the media and controlling the media. And the confirmation came because of the balls up in Vietnam, and they put that down to the loss of Vietnam, was the press. And that's when the press was completely castrated in every way. And we're experiencing the result now, I think. But at that particular period in time, there was the ascendancy, it was the height of the Cold War of the late 60s, and you had this ridiculous self-perpetuating arms race, which was completely out of control and was run by manic Cold War warriors, particularly in the Pentagon. It's not, I mean, you obviously had a reaction from the Soviet side, but that was a slightly different mentality. I don't think that was the aggressive mentality which was being perpetrated by the Pentagon, which in itself was being driven by the arms industry, which just came with where we still are, and why Kennedy was killed. And I think it was just a perpetuation of that. I was having a conversation earlier on with someone, and I was thinking about almost organised crime moved into the arms industry at the end of the Second World War and said, we've got to perpetuate this gravy train. How can we do it? And it sounds a bit of a grand plan, but it's an interesting theory when you look at the characters who are involved in it.
Yes, indeed. Author and journalist Chris Plumley, thank you for joining us on the subject of the USS liberty. You can still vote on my poll. 798 of you have. And Jeremy Corbyn's on 29, Julian Assange on 59, and Barack Obama on 12. Merrick says, can we expect any leadership from our head of state during the riots and violence? Well, she's 93 years old. The Queen was wheeled out to read some sentimental "we'll meet again" guff about the COVID situation, but it's radio silence on the social unrest. Isn't it time for us to elect our own head of state from whom we can expect some inspiration? And Shukla says, statues of those I admire already up for Mahatma Gandhi in London. By the way, they're trying to pull down the Mahatma Gandhi statue in Leicester. Brian Clough in Nottingham, and John Lennon in Liverpool. We now need John Kennedy. And on Facebook, Paul says, I'm watching from Madeira. Good evening. No deaths here as we lock down early. And Pete says, so what is the consensus on corona? Is it a hoax or just a stronger strain of flu? Neither, my dear friend. You've obviously not been listening. Let's hear from Brent in Southampton. Go ahead, Brent.
Yeah, hello, George. It's nice to be on the show again. I just want to talk about I suppose it's the issue of the stabbings, I think, in Reading. It really relates to something I've been quite interested in over the years. It's how the British state, for quite a long time, has always, quite often, been in alliance with Islamic extremism.
Sure.
It goes back
since
to
at least
probably the
50s.
1970s.
Well, the 50s.
And also
in the
possibly
50s,
even after
Brent.
the First World War.
No, in the 1950s, we were openly allied with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt against President Nasser. And there's a lot of chapter and verse on that. Go ahead, Brent.
Yeah, I mean, I can give you examples. The first example probably dates back to even during the Second World War. You could argue they supported the Arab revolt against the Ottoman Empire. Now, that
In the First
may have
World
not
War,
been
yeah.
such a bad thing. Also, just after the First World War, you had wars of intervention against the Soviet Russia, the Soviet Union. They actually supported someone called Enver Pasha. He was previously a confederate of Kemal Ataturk, but he disagreed with him on key issues. And he had something known as the army. He was the leader of something known as the Army of Islam, which fought against the Bolsheviks in the Caucasus. And, you know, fast forwarding to a few years, you had what you just mentioned, but also in Afghanistan. This is going into my lifetime now. In 1986, Islamist terrorists bombed Kabul airport. They killed a number of school children on their way to a youth festival in Moscow. Margaret Thatcher actually condoned it, actually supported it. It was also Margaret Thatcher's government who allowed people such as Abu Hamza into this country. I believe he was a nightclub bouncer, such a rare, in-demand job. But, I mean, I just feel that the media has covered up this link, and I've always been one of those people, like yourself, who's wanted to expose that link between the state, the British state, and Islamic terrorism.
Brilliant, Brent. I couldn't put it better. I won't try to. Because of the hour, I'll press on. But a brilliant call of the night, actually. Hamza is in London, is Libyan, and goes to university in Reading. Hamza, welcome to the show.
Hello, Hello, George. How are you? I hope you're well.
By the grace of God, I'm good. Thank you.
I'm a fan of you because you always stand with the truth, especially in the Libyan issue.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, sir. I would like to apologize to all of the British people about what this man has done, and this doesn't represent any. He doesn't represent the Libyans at all. He just represents himself, and what he did is so awful. And one more thing to add, George, is that he was, unfortunately, I just saw a picture that he was recruited during 2011, and he's a member of militias. Yeah, militias in Tripoli there. So again, I would like to say sorry about this, but at the same time, it's wrong to deal in the beginning with those people in 2011. It was wrong.
Absolutely correct, Hamza. Moreover, two additional points. One is that MI5 have admitted that they knew of this man. He was, quote unquote, on their radar. And secondly, of course, before he went to Reading, he lived in Manchester, where the rest of the cell of the
anti-government, the anti-Gaddafi government,
the Libyan,
the opposition, which was formed there.
Yeah, the Islamic fighting group, the clue being in the name, were deliberately cosseted by the British government and its security agencies in Manchester. They were encouraged to gather there in Manchester. And in that cell, metamorphosed the mass murderers of the children in the Manchester arena. They curdled in that cell, and out of it emerged these monsters. And now we find another Libyan who was living in Manchester, who is connected to the Islamist fanatics back in Libya, and who was known to MI5. It's becoming a pattern, Hamza.
True, sir. True, sir. True, sir. And I would like to apologize for what those two people did, because they're just representative of themselves. They don't represent the Libyans at all, sir. And even though, I hope now the British government opens an eye on some of the terrorist groups which are located now in Libya, unfortunately, with extremist Islamist ideology there. And I hope I hope they, in their foreign policy, they deal with the right people and just try to not to worsen the issue in the future.
Well, that's the best call of the night now, Hamza. Thank you very much for making it. Ian is in Hounslow. Go ahead, Ian.
Good evening, George.
Good evening, sir.
I wanted to talk about the problem of foreign criminals and us not being able to remove them from our shores.
It's absurd, isn't it?
It's absurd, but there is a reason for it, and I picked it up by watching the Parliament channel with the special committee about prison overcrowding. Now, these people fight tooth and nail not to be deported using the Human Rights Act. Their countries of origin fight tooth and nail not to have them back, because who wants a criminal back in their own country and have to pay for it? This is the problem, and our prison population, which is fit to bursting, 20%, is approaching 20% of foreign nationals, and we're stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Well, I would take the hardest possible line. I would say you are a Libyan asylum seeker. You have, and this is before this weekend, you have committed and been convicted of 3 criminal offences. One of them, you were sent to prison for a violent criminal offence. Quite a serious assault, actually, whilst working as a security guard, believe it or not. And I would say you are going back to Libya because that's where you come from. We don't care if you now claim that you converted to Christianity and will be in danger there. We don't care if you have a dog here and it would be cruel to separate you from that dog. We don't care if you now declare that you have certain personal habits that would make you endangered there. We don't care about any of that. You had 3 strikes. You're out, and we are going to put you on an aeroplane, private aeroplane if necessary, and we're going to leave you at Tripoli airport. And that's what we should be doing with all of these foreign criminals. We have enough British criminals. Why should we put up with foreign criminals on top of that?
The problem is, George, all these liberals, all these people with virtue signals saying, we can't be nasty to these people. We have to think of what they're going to face when they go back. But they're not the victims of crime.
Exactly.
They can hide from it.
Exactly. Well, I mean, there is an alternative. I don't favour it. But if you can't go back to Libya, you'll have to be hanged for multiple murder.
Well, George, I don't see an end to it, but you've highlighted a very, very serious problem. That's all I've got to say.
Thank you, Ian. Always a pleasure. Shred is in Illinois. Go ahead, Shred.
Hey, George. Thanks for having me on your show today.
Welcome.
You know, the thing I want to talk about here is this. You know, we talk about all these groups that are controlled by so-and-so, and we talk about all these politicians controlled by so-and-so in the media and Hollywood here in the United States, but who's the power players at the top? Who are the elite families at the top? Because we know that families like the Rothschilds have owned, like Reuters and the AP since the 1800s, and they've controlled all the knowledge, all the information.
But Rothschild doesn't own AP.
So let's talk about the people.
Well, let's talk about it. Rothschild does not own AP.
Reuters.
They don't own Reuters.
Reuters.
They don't own Reuters.
Who does?
I'm telling you, it isn't the Rothschilds.
Well, if it's not them, you obviously know who it is. Who is it?
Well, it was begun by the newspapers themselves. And then it was floated
They're all controlled by somebody.
Hold on.
We know about Maupin. Hey, wait a minute.
No.
You
wait a minute. You wait a minute. Reuters was established by the international mass media companies, television companies, newspapers. It was controlled and owned by them until comparatively recently. And then it was privatized. It was sold on the stock market. Rothschild does not own Reuters. This is a calumny. And I suspect that it's an anti-Semitic calumny, not least because you're about to speak about George Soros next. And we don't allow anti-Semites on this show, on this network. So be gone. Be gone. Now, I don't have any more comments. Chris, do get me some. Let's talk to the legend, Norma in Bristol. Go ahead, Norma.
Hello, George. I needed to speak to you because actually I wanted to say something nice because it's Father's Day, but I can't.
Yes.
No, I can't. The thing is, what I just wanted to say was I watched this television program the other night, and it was David Olusungo's The Secret Windrush Files.
Oh, yes.
And it went back 70 years, and I found it very embarrassing because all our governments were just shown to be so overt or covertly racist right up to the present day. And, I was...
Well, it doesn't
I was
even,
a bit ashamed. Ashamed.
No, you're right to feel that way. I feel that way too. But Norma, it doesn't even make sense. It's a little known fact that a British minister by the name of Enoch Powell, Enoch Powell actually toured the Caribbean, appealing to workers in the Caribbean to come to England, to work in our NHS, to work on our buses, to fill a gap in the labour market. Now, not only was it a British politician that did that, it was Enoch Powell who did it, and not even 10 years before, he then made his infamous statement about black people in Britain.
But it was, it went right back to all whether they were Labour or Tory, and they did show us, actually, him doing that, Enoch Powell. But anyway, George, the other thing was, I just wanted to say, I used to go to Saturday morning pictures when I was a teenager.
So did I. We come along on a Saturday morning. There was a man
everybody with a smile.
Exactly. There was a man playing an organ at the front of the cinema.
Oh, well, we didn't. We just have a record on ours.
No, we had an organist in the Gaumont, in Dundee, or Gaumont as we called it.
Oh, we had the organ. But I, just like you, I don't always want to agree with you, but we saw cowboy and Indian films. We saw one film, then another little cartoon, then a main one. And I always wanted the Red Indians to win, but the cowboys always did.
Yes, it wasn't until Soldier Blue in the 1970s and the Dustin Hoffman movie Little Big Man that we saw depicted on the silver screen who the real goodies and who the real baddies were.
Ah, well, I didn't see that, but
well, you're too young. You're too young, but Buffy Sainte-Marie, she sang the Soldier Blue signature tune, very beautiful, actually. But Soldier Blue was the first movie that showed the truth, that the white settlers were the savages, and the people we'd been brought up to believe as savages were the victims of their savagery.
Well, it came out, didn't it? And I want to put Tony Byrne for a statue in Bristol because he was in Bristol for a very long time and he was such a good bloke.
Thank you, Norma. I appreciate that very much. In fact, I can tell you that the main owners of Reuters are Thomson Press, not Rothschild. These kind of racist calumnies we will not put up with here on the mother of all talk shows. I have never once found a single caller to any of my shows who has mentioned Rothschild to have been telling the truth about Rothschild. I hear it all the time. Rothschild owns the media, doesn't own any media. Rothschild owns the banks, owns a small private bank. The big banks are owned by pension funds and private shareholders in their millions, not by a Jewish family long established in the banking and finance issues. It's right to hate the mainstream media. It's right to hate the role that banking and finance plays in a modern capitalist economy. It is entirely false, wrong, damaging, and dangerous to somehow substitute Jewish people, either generically or in the name of a family, for the crimes of the mass media and of the banks. I really cannot have it. Now, in the moments left to me, I want to say a few things. First of all, don't forget my speech on Tuesday night on Brexit, the battle for Britain, on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube. I think you'll enjoy it. I hope you will anyway. It's exactly the anniversary of the great victory for Brexit in the European Union referendum. Secondly, I have started signing again copies of my debut novel, Queensway. I said I'd sign the first 1,000, but such is the demand, I've decided to sign some more. You can get it on Kindle, you can get it on Amazon, or you can get it directly from me and it'll be signed and dedicated. And you can do that at info@georgegalloway.com. And I want to ask Facebook why they have taken down my RT documentary film called The Patriot Game, which charts the history of fascism in Britain. There is absolutely nothing in that film. It's a half-hour documentary that would warrant Facebook taking it down from my page. It had more than 120,000 views in 4 days since we re-floated it, re-put it up, reposted it on Facebook. I'm appealing to Facebook to reverse this ban. If they don't, I will take legal action against them for this arbitrary act of censorship against me and against a film that I am proud of. It's been marvellous for me. I hope it was for you. And if it was, come back next week at the same time.